Hi everyone, welcome to 1% Crime. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you with crime stories that happened all over the world. Before we get to the story, tell me, where did you hear it from? And if you like this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. On May 19, 2023, the investigation began at approximately 9:45 a.m. when Jeremy Bailey, 34 years old, called the police to report that he had just killed his wife, his parents-in-law, and the family's 3 dogs. When police entered the front door of the home, they immediately saw 2 dead dogs at the foot of the stairs leading to the upper floor. However, the 3 victims were found in 3 upstairs bedrooms, 1 in each room. Latent paramedics determined that all 3 victims were deceased. The 3rd dead dog was found in the basement of the home. The victims were later identified as Anastasia Stevens, 36, her father, Donald Stevens, 73, and her stepmother, Becky Stevens, 61. Spent shell casings were found near each person and the deceased dog, and a black handgun with the slide lock on the back and the magazine removed, along with an open handgun magazine with the magazines missing, and 2 cell phones were discovered on the kitchen table. A search warrant was issued for the victim's home and vehicles. A receipt for ammunition was found, and point-of-purchase surveillance video showed that the suspect was in the store, purchasing ammunition approximately 45 minutes before Bailey called dispatch to report the shooting. When police arrived on the scene, the suspect contacted dispatch and advised that he was leaving the home to surrender. He complied with the warrant and was taken into custody without incident. Bailey was taken to the Layton Police Department, where he was recorded on tape and video. Bailey told Layton police that he killed his wife, in-laws, and 3 of the family's 4 dogs about 20 minutes before calling to report the shooting. He had stored the weapon in a friend's garage because he had planned to commit the act several days earlier. The friend later confirmed this to police, stating that the suspect had given him the gun on May 17th. He was armed with a Springfield 9mm that had belonged to one of the victims and had forgotten about it until the day of the incident. Bailey had confessed to arguing with his wife before killing her and her parents. According to initial charging documents, one of the victims sent a text message to a therapist that morning, stating that they had serious problems that might require legal intervention. The victim added that they could not talk further because Bailey was in the house. On the morning of the murder, a short time after the shooting, Bailey posted on his wife's Facebook page that he had just killed everyone and listed his address. He described what he had done as a massacre. Bailey admitted to entering the bedroom and shooting Anastasia twice. His wife's family was in nearby rooms, and he shot them immediately after killing his wife. The gun he used belonged to one of the victims. During questioning, Bailey asked not to take his surviving dog to the dog farm and requested an attorney before being questioned. He also asked investigators if the death penalty and the firing squad were still available, stating that he would rather be executed than spend life in prison. Bailey was booked into the Davis County Jail, where he pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder and 3 counts of discharging a firearm, all first-degree felonies. He is also charged with 3 counts of aggravated cruelty to animals. In October, Bailey accepted a plea deal during a virtual court appearance from the Davis County Jail. Bailey's chilling confession continued as he described his methodical approach to the murders, saying he had been planning them for days. When asked if he realized the severity of his actions, Bailey simply replied that he couldn't believe what he had done. His statement to police was described as cold and matter-of-fact, with no sign of remorse for the deaths of his family members and pets. His defense team attempted to argue for a reduced sentence based on his mental state, but the prosecution pursued the death penalty. In his plea, the state dismissed the remaining charges against Bailey. The charges against Bailey were also amended from aggravated murder to first-degree aggravated murder as part of the plea agreement. The court scheduled to deliver his sentence on December 12, 2023. That hearing is expected to finalize the terms of his sentence, considering the circumstances of the case, including his mental state and the events leading up to the crime. According to the planned timeline, at Jeremy Bailey's sentencing, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole for the murders of his wife, Anastasia Stevens, her father, Donald Stevens, her stepmother, Becky Stevens, and 3 family dogs. Bailey pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated murder. Although he was initially charged with premeditated murder, he avoided the death penalty due to his plea. The horrific case of Jeremy Bailey serves as a stark reminder of the dark consequences of domestic violence, premeditated violence, and the potential for deep anger to escalate into extreme actions. Bailey's calculated actions, which resulted in the deaths of his wife, her parents, and 3 family pets, underscore the chilling reality of premeditated violence. After the murders, Bailey's lack of remorse and cold demeanor during the investigation reflected his indifference to the gravity of his crimes. His crimes have not only taken the lives of his family members, but also caused deep pain for those around him. Now, he will have to pay for his barbaric actions for the rest of his life. Welcome back to my channel. Today we will learn together about the case of a grandson killing his grandparents. The case of Jeremy Dwayne Belt. Thomas and Janice Walker, both born in Colorado, have lived happily together for the past 60 years. They had a daughter and a grandson named Jeremy Dwayne Belt. They served on the Clearfield Citizens Patrol for more than 10 years, until 2019. Family and friends described them as loyal and selfless people, who quietly devoted without fanfare, always did good for others. On November 23, 2022, Belt, then 26, argued with his mother and said he believed his grandparents Thomas and Janice were trying to harm him. Belt told his mother he felt an electric current in the room and asked if she could feel it too. During the argument, he became angry and kicked his mother in the face. After being kicked, his mother left the house. Later, Belt meets his grandparents, Thomas and Janice, and he accuses them of trying to harm him. As they gathered their belongings and went to the garage to get their car with the intention of leaving, he followed them in. There he began using a small sledgehammer to destroy their car. His grandparents were unable to leave the garage because he had cut the motor cord to the garage door, preventing them from leaving. Next, Belt kicked his grandparents in the chest, continuing to use the small sledgehammer to attack them, causing head injuries to both of them. They fell to the ground and were unable to get up. He then left the garage, went into the bedroom to get a .22 caliber rifle, loaded it into the chamber, and returned to the garage to shoot his grandmother, Janice, in the head. When he realized he needed more bullets, he went to get more bullets, then returned to the garage to shoot his grandfather Thomas dead. After killing his grandparents, he returned the .22 caliber rifle to the room from which he had taken it. He closed and locked the gun room, then went into his bedroom in the basement. At approximately 3:10 p.m., Thomas and Janice's daughter, Belt's mother, returned home to find her parents dead in the garage. She immediately called the police and expressed suspicion that Belt was the culprit and that he might still be in the house. Clearfield police arrived shortly thereafter. When they arrived, they found her in the garage and immediately took her to safety. They then surrounded the house. Belt, after a phone conversation with his mother and the police, decided to surrender. Belt was arrested and taken to the police station. Initially, he denied any involvement in the murders. He told the police that his grandparents had tried to harm him. He said that he returned home around 3 p.m. that day and found his grandparents injured in the garage. However, police showed him surveillance video, which showed that he had been in the garage with his grandparents from the start, and was not the one who found them injured as he had initially claimed. Faced with this evidence, he changed his story, admitting that he had killed his grandparents. He described the attack in detail, saying that he had kicked his grandparents, then hit them with a hammer and finally shot them with a .22 caliber rifle. Belt's story was supported by evidence at the scene, including the murder weapon and several household items. He also admitted that the night before, he had used methamphetamine, and on the day of the incident, he had used marijuana and Xanax. After admitting to the murder, Belt was arrested without resistance. During a search of Belt's room, investigators seized psilocybin mushrooms, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia such as pipes, bongs, a marijuana grinder, and glass jars. They also recovered the .22 caliber rifle he used in the crime. Based on the evidence collected in Belt's confession, he was held without bail in the Davis County Jail. Belt was charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, along with other charges including illegal possession of a weapon, since he was barred from possessing a weapon, assault, and drug possession. Belt's preliminary hearing took place in July 2024 in Davis County Circuit Court. As part of the plea agreement, he admitted to 2 counts of first-degree murder, instead of the original charge of aggravated murder, which could have carried the death penalty. In addition, other charges such as illegal possession of a weapon, drug possession, and assault were also dismissed as part of the agreement. 2 months later, in September 2024, Belt's trial began. The prosecution alleged that Belt's killing of his grandparents was premeditated, including damaging the garage door motor to prevent his grandparents from leaving, then using a sledgehammer and a gun to kill them. Additionally, at the time of the incident, he was also facing another trial, related to a third-degree assault charge from 2019. In that incident, he was accused of slamming his ex-girlfriend's head into a car and choking her to the point of unconsciousness. The incident also occurred in the same garage where Belt's grandparents were murdered. Prosecutors emphasized the brutality of Belt's crimes, detailing how he attacked his grandparents with a sledgehammer before using a rifle to finish them off, adding to the gravity of the case. Although Belt admitted his guilt, but his actions were still cruel and callous. However, the defense countered those arguments. Lawyers argued that Belt was mentally unstable, under the influence of drugs and psychological issues. Belt had a history of mental health issues, which they used in mitigation. The defense negotiated a plea deal to reduce Belt's sentence, avoiding the death penalty. They argued that Belt's guilty plea and cooperation with investigators showed remorse, which merited mitigation. The use of stimulants such as methamphetamine and Xanax was cited as a factor in Belt's impaired control at the time of the crime. The defense attempted to prove that the crime was not entirely premeditated. They believed the attack was caused by Belt becoming angry and losing control during a tense family situation. Despite the defense's arguments, the overwhelming evidence and the seriousness of the crime led to Jeremy Dwayne Belt, 28, being sentenced to 2 consecutive prison terms, each lasting 15 years to life. The total sentence could range from 30 years to life, depending on the possibility of future parole. The court believed the killing were premeditated, including damaging the garage door to prevent his grandparents from leaving and using a weapon to commit the violent act. Welcome back to our channel. Today we are going to explore a new case. A child abuse case has caused outrage. Child abuse is not only a physical atrocity, but also a profound crime against humanity and morality. Such cases not only shock public opinion, but also raise significant questions about our responsibility to protect vulnerable lives in society. The case of Shanda Vander Ark is a typical example of this cruelty. The story begins when the body of a 15-year-old boy, Timothy Ferguson, was found in a state of severe neglect in July 2022. His emaciated body was discovered in a separate and polluted environment, exposing the horrors that took place behind closed doors. The police reported that Timothy was emaciated and weighed only 69 pounds. The boy's body also showed signs of hypothermia. From this point, the investigation revealed a series of horrifying events that no one could have anticipated. Let's delve into the details of this case to better understand what happened and to recognize society's responsibility to prevent and protect innocent victims. Authorities in Norton Shores, Michigan, immediately launched a criminal investigation after Timothy's body was found. Shanda Vander Ark, Timothy's mother, became the prime suspect. Evidence from the home showed severe signs of neglect and abuse, including physical injuries consistent with prolonged mistreatment. Shanda Vander Ark was arrested, and her surviving children were taken into protective custody. Investigators interviewed family members, neighbors, and school officials, which confirmed further allegations of abuse. Murder, child abuse, and neglect charges were filed as forensic evidence, and testimony built the case against her. Ark is facing first-degree felony charges of murder and first-degree child abuse. Prosecutors built a case against her using forensic evidence and witness testimony. The case has attracted attention due to the severe nature of the neglect and abuse Timothy endured. During the week-long trial, witnesses testified that Timothy slept in a small closet in the basement without any furniture or blankets, and a detective showed the court photos of the closet, noting that the only items in it were a blue tarp and an Amazon box. Police reported that the room smelled strongly of urine and feces. Authorities stated that security cameras were found throughout the home. Locks were installed on the refrigerator and pantry to prevent Timothy from sneaking food, while the boy was severely malnourished. Timothy was placed in the care of his brother, Byron Ferguson, 20, who was also charged with complicity in his murder. Ferguson frequently expressed frustration with Timothy, saying in one text message, "I'm ready to kill Timothy." Text messages between Vander Ark and Ferguson accused the victim of faking his mental disability. According to testimony from Ferguson, Ark and Ferguson often discussed ways to make Timothy uncomfortable, such as making him stand facing a wall for hours at a time or sitting on a wall. Timothy was also sometimes forced to run up and down the stairs while Ferguson chased him. Ferguson admitted to punishing his brother by feeding him Carolina Reaper hot sauce on pieces of bread or pouring it directly into his mouth. Timothy was often tortured by being immersed in an ice bath for hours at a time. Handcuffs and zip ties were used to restrict his movements. The day before his death, Ferguson said Timothy was unresponsive in the morning, and Ark asked him to use a painful method to wake him up. Ark suggested heating up a pizza roll to see if Timothy would respond to the temptation. When Timothy did respond, Ferguson had to pull it away as instructed. His mother even asked that hot sauce be poured on Timothy's genitals. Ferguson said he tried to resuscitate Timothy for 18 minutes the morning he was found dead before they called 911. He stated that Ark told him to lie to the police and say Timothy was on a hunger strike. Ferguson initially lied, but later confessed the whole truth to investigators. Ferguson claimed that all of this was at Ark's behest, citing a desire to make his mother proud. During her testimony, Ark caused the court to temporarily stop the trial after she appeared to vomit or retch when shown photos of her son's body. She claimed that she did not remember many details about the days, weeks, and months leading up to Timothy's death. Throughout the trial, her attorney attempted to present her client as a hard-working and educated mother who did her best as a parent. However, the lead prosecutor repeatedly questioned how she treated Timothy, especially in comparison to her other children. Ferguson pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse and was sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison. He begged for leniency. A few weeks later, Vander Ark filed an appeal in hopes of overturning the decision to terminate her parental rights regarding her 8-year-old son, who was also living with Ark and Ferguson during Timothy's abuse. Vander Ark's parental rights were stripped from her in a civil case after she was convicted of a crime in early 2023. However, the Court of Appeals has yet to respond to the appeals in either case. On January 23, 2024, during the sentencing hearing attended by Millie and Nolan, her two remaining children, Millie expressed deep regret for not being able to protect her brother. She reflected on lost moments, such as not telling him she loved him more often. In his statement, Nolan insisted that Ark should not be freed. Both siblings firmly believe that Ark deserves the harshest punishment for her actions. Judge Matthew Kakel was outraged, calling her actions intentional torture. Ark, while facing charges, refused to speak and showed no remorse. Judge declared Shanda Vander Ark was sentenced to life in prison without parole and an additional 50 to 100 years for child abuse. Paul Ferguson pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse for torturing Timothy. Before sentencing, Ferguson told the judge, "I just asked the judge to be merciful and fair, to give me compassion so I can learn. I feel like I'm going to pay the price for my choices, but I'm never going to feel better because he's still gone." After deliberations, Muskegon County Judge Matthew Kakel sentenced Ferguson to 30 to 100 years in prison. He received credit for 592 days of time already served. The case of Timothy Ferguson serves as a tragic example of how serious neglect and violence can occur even within families, often hidden behind closed doors. The horror of the treatment Timothy received from his mother and brother reflects urgent social issues such as domestic violence, mental health, and child protection. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Natalia Martinez. Natalia Martinez was born in the late 1980s in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, and she was the youngest daughter in her family. While not much is known about her personality, she had a close relationship with her relatives, especially her older sister, Claudia. Her father was a senior salesman for a large international company that sold household appliances, which allowed the family to live comfortably. Natalia was a cheerful and friendly girl. During her teenage years, she formed a close-knit group of friends who supported one another during difficult times. These friends later described her as sociable and able to connect easily with strangers. After graduating from high school, Natalia began spending more time with her friends. They enjoyed going to various parties and eventually expanded their adventures by visiting the beaches of Uruguay for fun. To celebrate her 19th birthday on January 1st, 2007, Natalia and her friends planned a trip to La Paloma, a small resort town, where they stayed for 2 weeks. On January 16th, they traveled to a nearby resort in the city of Riles, where Natalia was delighted to meet her parents and sister, who were there for a 4-day vacation. The Natalia family had a wonderful time enjoying beach activities and were well known in the town, as they frequently visited. They often returned to the same places, making it feel like a second home. On January 18th, Natalia and her sister Claudia decided to drive to Punta del Este, another tourist town less than an hour away from Riles. They planned to stop at a popular local spa located about halfway between the two towns in the San Antonio area. After their beauty treatment, the girls planned to go to a disco with 3 of Natalia's friends. However, as the evening approached, Claudia felt very tired and decided to go home to their parents. Despite this, 19-year-old Natalia Martinez was determined to stick to her plans. She wanted to enjoy herself, so she went with her friends to a popular party at the local nightclub, Plea in Canada, where they stayed until around 5 a.m. As morning approached, the girls decided to leave the party and head home. At that time, Natalia was talking with a man named Leonardo Rakovin, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore. They stopped near the exit and continued their conversation. However, Natalia became so engrossed in her discussion with Leonardo that her friends decided to go outside and get into the car they had arrived in, planning to head home together. The girls got tired and got into the car. One of them decided to check on Natalia, but when they returned to the nightclub, they found that Natalia and Leonardo were gone. The friends realized that Natalia could not have left alone or with anyone else without letting them know. Since they did not see her leave, they began to worry. They went up to the second floor, out of the bar, and saw Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The owner was inside the car, and because the windows were tinted, Rosalia and Silva could not see if anyone was in the passenger seat. However, they did notice some movement inside the car. The girls called out to Leonardo to ask about Natalia. He said he was in the car with a friend and mentioned that he had spoken to Natalia briefly before they parted ways. He claimed he had no idea what happened to her afterward or why she didn't return to her friends. The girls assumed Natalia had gone home, so they got into the car and drove to her friend's relatives, who were at the police station, just a 10-minute drive from the club. Rosalia and Silva stopped near the house and hunked to get Claudia's attention, trying not to wake the entire family. However, no one responded, so they returned to the club where they last saw Natalia. The girls continued to search for their friend for about 2 hours, but their efforts were unsuccessful. No one knew where she had gone. Around 8 a.m., Silva returned home, exhausted and very worried about her missing friend. Worried about her friend's safety, she decided to tell her parents everything that had happened. She feared something bad might have happened to her friend. Her parents tried to reassure her, telling her to rest and that her friend was probably already home. So she went to bed. Yet, when she woke up at 11 a.m. that same day, her concerns grew stronger. The entire Natalia family started searching for she. They quickly got involved, and her friends went to the club together to find out what happened. Unfortunately, they were still unsuccessful. The club was closed, and no one had any helpful information. They searched the surrounding area for clues but found nothing. Around 5 p.m., Natalia's family and friends arrived at the police station. Maldonado police investigators received several photos, including one of all the girls relaxing at a club that evening. This helped them understand what the missing girl was wearing, so they could come up with a description for the search. The police took their statements seriously and began investigating. Initially, the family said that Natalia had been at a party where she may have had too much to drink and left with someone. However, Rosalia and Silva insisted that Natalia had not consumed any alcohol that night, as she often denied. They also dismissed the police's suspicions that they had used illegal drugs. Police began a search operation. They first went to the location where Natalia was last seen. The club was open, but there were no surveillance cameras at the time. Police spoke to club employees and learned that a group of 3 young men sitting at a nearby table had been trying to approach the women throughout the evening. Natalia's friends confirmed that the men had been harassing them. Despite this information, police ignored the group of young men and instead focused on the acquaintance with whom Natalia had been talking before she disappeared. It was no surprise that Leonardo immediately became the prime suspect, since he was the last person to see Natalia. However, all of Leonardo's acquaintances described him as a kind and calm person who had never shown any signs of cruelty before and was incapable of harming anyone. He was a young businessman. That night, his girlfriend waited for him in a car while he was talking to Natalia. After that, he said goodbye to Natalia and returned to the car with his girlfriend. From the car, he saw Natalia go down the stairs and go out onto the porch. From that moment on, Leonardo was distracted by his conversation with his girlfriend and did not see Natalia again. However, he was not worried about her, since he did not notice anything suspicious around. No one was screaming or making noise. Despite the police suspicions, Leonardo insisted he had nothing to do with Natalia's disappearance. However, the police did not trust him. They needed to conduct a thorough examination of the BMW he drove away in after the party. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar car in various locations around the city, including near a forest on the outskirts. One man claimed he spotted a couple having sex in a car that matched the description on the night she went missing, near a lake by the woods. Police obtained a search warrant for Leonardo's car. During the initial inspection, they found a long, dark hair on the floor of the BMW and sent it for analysis. However, it did not match Natalia. It belonged to someone else. The interior of the car showed no signs of suspicious activity, no blood, or evidence of a struggle. Police speculated that Leonardo had cleaned the car shortly after Natalia Martinez disappeared, which would explain the clean condition of the car. Police used this detail as part of the evidence against Leonardo. However, they still lacked the evidence to arrest him. On January 22nd, a passerby driving on the outskirts of Polis discovered several items on the roadside. Among them were a woman's handbag containing a wallet and a pair of women's shoes. The most crucial piece of evidence was linked to Natalia Martinez, a case that was currently receiving significant media attention. Recognizing the situation, the witness promptly contacted the police. Unfortunately, the media coverage also led to the spread of various rumors, which Natalia's family had to repeatedly deny. One such rumor suggested that Natalia was involved with drug dealers, implying that she had become a victim of criminal activities. However, Natalia's father publicly refuted these claims in an official television statement. Despite the situation, rumors continued to spread. Some claimed to have witnessed her being attacked or even murdered. Instead of receiving assistance from the media, police found themselves overwhelmed by numerous false testimonies each day that needed to be verified, complicating the investigation. Meanwhile, the media eagerly reported even the most outrageous theories. The story was considered compelling and attracted many readers, causing journalists to add fuel to the fire of chaos surrounding the case. The rumors about the missing girl were leveraged to boost newspaper sales. Natalia's family endured immense pain following her disappearance. A large-scale search operation was organized, involving many police officers, friends, family members, and hundreds of volunteers. It was quickly determined that there was no evidence of the girl near the nightclub, prompting the search to extend into more distant areas of Uruguay. Ultimately, the entire coast was thoroughly searched. Most of the search operations took place on land, using service dogs and later involving military and civilian aircraft. The City Fire Brigade also participated in the search and requested that the sewer systems be inspected. However, no traces of Natalia were found there either. By this point, law enforcement had largely concluded that Natalia was deceased, as the likelihood of finding her alive was very low. The critical window for finding missing persons is usually 48 hours. A significant finding occurred when a bone was discovered on the Grande Plateau, but tests revealed it was not human. Although the search had stalled and no new leads had emerged, Natalia's relatives continued their efforts. They remained hopeful that she was alive and being held against her will. In 2000, a female body was discovered in the forest near Lake Yolo. The body was in poor condition and was sent for examination to determine the identity of the deceased. This location was several kilometers from the club where Natalia was last seen, and the clothing found on the body led police to suspect it might belong to the missing Natalia Martinez. After the discovery of the body, police remembered a couple who had been seen having sex in a car near the forest, which drew attention to that area. The forensic expert who performed the autopsy struggled to gather important information because the body was in an advanced state of decomposition. To ensure a thorough examination, 5 forensic experts were called in. They determined that the body belonged to Natalia Martinez. Their overall assessments suggested that she likely did not die of natural causes, as there were faint signs of strangulation on her neck. Although they ruled out poisoning from substances or alcohol, they could not find evidence of physical or sexual violence due to the body's condition. It was noteworthy that the victim was found tied with nylon thread, but it remained unclear whether this occurred before or after her death. Several months later, while the investigation continued, an unexpected development arose. The man who had found her belongings on the roadside was discovered dead at the bottom of a cliff near his home. His name was initially kept confidential. Initially, it appeared that the man had voluntarily chosen to end his life. However, all his relatives insisted that he would never do such a thing. He was a deeply religious man, cherished his life, and loved his family. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head sustained long before the fall from the cliff, suggesting he had been thrown off. This led police to believe the two cases were linked. But more evidence was needed. The next tragic event involved Natalia's father, Ever Martinez. He had fallen into a deep depression after his daughter's death and the damaging rumors that were circulating about their family. He ended his life at home by shooting himself in the head. His body was discovered by his daughter Claudia and his wife. The police closed the case after confirming that he had acted alone, a conclusion that the family accepted. For a long time, police struggled to make progress in the investigation into Natalia's murder. However, new information emerged from text messages exchanged with a friend just days before Natalia's death. In these conversations, Natalia mentioned a man she had recently met online. It was later discovered that he was one of the men who had been at the nightclub on the day Natalia went missing. These three young men were sitting at a nearby table, and several witnesses had pointed them out from the beginning of the investigation, but this information was overlooked. Police identified all three suspects, who were slightly older than Natalia. After interviewing them, the police became even more suspicious of their involvement as the men contradicted each other in their statements about where they were and what they did during the night and morning of that tragic day. After this, the police interviewed a witness whose identity was kept confidential for her safety. She was the girlfriend of one of the men who had been arrested. Her testimony revealed that a young man in the group, Rodrigo Verghese, was involved in Natalia's murder. At the time, he was 25 years old, and police later stated that he had previously provided false statements. During the interrogation, police recorded phone conversations that implicated the Rodrigo main suspect. They collected DNA samples from him, but these were not helpful for the investigation due to the advanced decomposition of the remains. After that, the police reached out to the friends and relatives of the Rodrigo. A young man was called to testify on June 8, 2010, along with his friends who had been at a nightclub on the night of Natalia's murder. They all claimed they had no involvement in the incident. They stated that after spending the night at the club, they hired a sex worker to join them in their continued festivities. However, they denied any connection to Natalia. Rodrigo, the prime suspect, denied spending time with the murdered woman and claimed he did not know her. However, messages from the girl revealed that they had spoken online and planned to meet at a party, suggesting that Rodrigo had lied. Initial questioning did not turn up any clues, but a day later, police spoke to the young people again in the hope of getting a confession. This time, Rodrigo confessed. He explained that he had met Natalia online, and after chatting for a while, they decided to meet at a club. Unfortunately, their conversation did not go well, and as dawn approached, he suggested they go to another nearby nightclub. Rodrigo misled her. He wanted to be alone with her. During this time, he began to harass her, according to his confession. When she rejected his advances, he seemed to accept it. However, Natalia then suffered an asthma attack, which led to convulsions and ultimately her death, as she did not have her inhaler or any medication with her. Rodrigo was confused and unable to help her. He stated that he panicked during her attack and didn't know what to do, especially when she stopped showing signs of life in his car. After the party, he planned to return to his family's farm, a short distance from the city. However, after Natalia's death, he decided to dispose of her body to avoid any further repercussions. He headed for the woods, thinking it would be a good place to hide her. There, he tied Natalia up, dragged her deeper into the woods, and covered her body with branches. But this was only part of the story. A witness walking along the beach claimed to have seen a couple having sex, and Natalia's body showed signs of strangulation. It seems that Rodrigo neglected to mention that he had strangled and raped her at the same time. Police were later able to confirm that Rodrigo's other friends were not involved in the incident, so they were released shortly after Rodrigo confessed. Rodrigo was formally charged with murder and taken into custody. After the confession, it appeared that the prosecutor's office would easily prove the Rodrigo's guilt. However, in mid-2010, as preliminary hearings began, Rodrigo Verghese recanted his confession. He claimed he admitted to the murder under police pressure and insisted he did not commit the crime. This assertion seemed unlikely because his confession included numerous details only the actual killer would know, including the precise location where the girl's body was found. Still, Rodrigo maintained his innocence. Despite the evidence against him, His defense team supported his statement and sought to demonstrate that Rodrigo was not at the club that night. They presented mobile phone data and a statement from his employer confirming that he had been working his usual evening shift that day. The next day, he attended a friend's wedding, and no one noticed anything unusual about his behavior. On September 2, 2010, Leonardo Rakovin, the bookstore owner who was initially the main suspect in the investigation, was called as a key witness for the prosecution. Leonardo testified that during a conversation, he had an argument with a young man. Leonardo identified the young man as Rodrigo. This indicated that Rodrigo was definitely at the nightclub and not at work. Natalia's friends also confirmed that he was at the nightclub that night. Forensic experts, working with the prosecution, provided insights based on the autopsy results. They noted that, due to the typical symptoms of asthma, the girl could not have died from an asthma attack so quickly. While she did experience an asthma attack, it could not have occurred instantaneously. It took several hours. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on the victim's neck, which was likely the cause of death. Unfortunately, the experts could not provide further details about the victim's injuries. From late August to mid-September 2010, the prosecution successfully constructed a narrative of the crime leading to Rodrigo Vergés being found guilty of Natalia Martinez's murder. He received a 9-year prison sentence. However, in February 2011, Rodrigo's lawyer submitted an appeal claiming that the court's ruling was incorrect and that the prosecution was biased. The lawyer argued that they failed to present a witness to the kidnapping or murder, nor did they provide any compelling direct evidence. Natalia's family expressed disappointment, saying that the criminal received the lighter sentence than the family had expected. Disappointed by this leniency, Natalia's relatives filed a civil lawsuit against Rodrigo Vergés for causing harm to Natalia's family, holding him responsible for her father's death. Initially, they mentioned that Rodrigo should pay $15 in damages. However, after further discussion, both parties agreed to increase the amount of damages to $7,000. The court rejected the request for a longer sentence. On October 27, 2014, the lawyer achieved his goal when Rodrigo, 29, was pardoned after serving only 4 years and 2 months in prison. His release was largely due to his good behavior while in custody. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sandra Miles. Sandra was born on May 26, 1949, in the small, cozy town of Harn, Kansas, USA. She had a close relationship with her sister. They attended the same school, walked together, and spent time with their family. After graduating from high school, Sandra focused on starting a family. She was in a serious relationship with her boyfriend, and they decided to get married. They welcomed a son named Chad. Unfortunately, the marriage did not work out. Sandra quickly realized that her husband was not the right match for her. After the divorce, Sandra found another partner, but that relationship also ended in disappointment, leading her to break up with him as well. In 1976, Sandra, a single mother, got a job at a factory that made pumps and pistons for industrial machinery. This job required her family to relocate to a larger city, Hutchinson. In her new position, Sandra proved herself and gained the respect of management through her hard work and responsibility. She performed her tasks exceptionally well. It was during this time that she met her third husband, Jerry Miles. They were instantly attracted to each other, and their friendship quickly blossomed into romance, leading to their decision to marry. Their marriage happened rapidly, but it was evident that Jerry and Sandra truly loved each other and were eager to get married. A year later, Sandra was expecting a baby with her new husband. In September of that year, they welcomed their daughter, Tracy, who brought immense joy to her parents, especially Sandra, who had always dreamed of having a large family. During this time, their marriage appeared to be perfect. The couple had a strong bond and prioritized their family above all else. Jerry's children regularly communicated with him and participated in family events. He particularly enjoyed spending time with Tracy at the nearby lake. To outsiders, their marriage appeared perfect. However, only close friends and family knew of the underlying issue. After 7 years of marriage, Sandra could no longer endure her husband's alcoholism. This revelation shocked many, as she had previously concealed the problem. Sandra ultimately chose to end her marriage to her third husband, Jerry, and raise their children by herself. She thought Jerry was a kind man when he was sober, but he had difficulty managing his drinking. When he drank, he became a completely different person. At first, he was able to control his drinking, but over time, his alcoholism became more and more evident. His relapses became more frequent, placing a heavy burden on Sandra. She worked every day at the factory to support the family, and eventually became exhausted from the thing. Sandra always saw Jerry as a wonderful husband and father. Their relationship ended because he struggled with alcohol addiction. Even so, she continued to support their children while maintaining her job. This was a challenging time for her, but she was determined not to give up and managed to handle the difficulties well. Jerry offered some help, but when he succumbed to alcohol again, Sandra had to face all the challenges alone. Despite this, she stayed confident in her abilities and was driven to ensure her children had a bright future and everything they needed for a fulfilling life. It was certainly challenging, but Sandra Miles was not one to give up easily. She remained a conscientious mother, spending all her free time with her children. Despite facing difficulties, she handled them with grace, which brought her closer to her daughter Tracy during this time. Her son had grown up, moved out, and started his own life, but Tracy continues to support her mother because she realizes that Sandra's efforts are mainly to benefit her. In the spring of 1997, Sandra's relationship with Tracy, her 16-year-old daughter, began to deteriorate. Tracy has started dating her first boyfriend and is going through the rebellious phase that is common in adolescence. Sandra tried to improve their relationship. She thought her daughter's problems were only temporary. At the same time, Sandra was mindful of her own past failed marriages and felt the need to caution Tracy about the mistakes she made in her youth. Tracy's affection for her mother faded quickly, leading to a strained relationship between them. To win her daughter's love, Sandra bought Tracy a Black Moon car, which Tracy had longed for. This gift excited Tracy. She adored her car and made a point to arrive first at school every day so everyone would notice it. It seemed like Tracy had a bright future ahead, and she represented hope for Sandra. Sandra was determined to do whatever it took to help her daughter succeed. However, fate can be cruel. On March 20th, Sandra's son Chad and his girlfriend Mindy visited her with exciting news. Mindy was pregnant. Sandra was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandmother and eagerly anticipated the birth of her grandson. Unfortunately, Sandra would not live to see that moment. While Sandra's sister, Pat Douglas Butler, was having breakfast with her husband, she received an urgent call from Sandra's workplace. Sandra's employer reported that Sandra had been absent for 5 days. Concerned for her well-being, the boss tried to contact her but was unable to reach her. Pat also hadn't heard from her during this time, as they didn't typically call each other every day. Worried, Pat and her husband decided to visit Sandra's house to check if she was okay or if she needed help. When Pat and her husband arrived, they found the door locked and the house appeared deserted. This was strange because Sandra lived there with her daughter, Tracy, who was usually very active and should have been home at that time. Then, Pat and her husband went to the school to look for Tracy. The teachers were confused as Tracy had also been absent for several days. The class teacher, Noni, tried to call the family, but no one answered. Alarmed by the situation, Pat decided to call the police to report the disappearance of both Sandra and Tracy. The officers took Pat's statement and assessed the situation. When they arrived, Pat was waiting for them and handed over a spare key to the front door that she had kept. Law enforcement officers entered the house and immediately detected a strong, unpleasant smell of decomposition, unmistakable in nature. The experienced patrol officers recognized the importance of preserving the crime scene to protect the evidence, so they called for backup. When additional police officers arrived, they discovered the decomposed body of a woman lying on her bed, covered with a blanket. Upon removing the blanket, they found a power cord from a household appliance wrapped around her neck, indicating she likely died from strangulation. Additionally, there were multiple injuries visible on her face and head. Due to the severe level of decomposition, the victim's identity could not be immediately determined. It was unclear how many blows she had suffered or what exactly was hit with, but it was clear that her death was not natural, it was a murder. A forensic medical examination was needed to understand the details surrounding her death. However, dental records confirmed that the body belonged to Sandra Miles. Besides, they could not find Tracy in the house, indicating that she was missing. At first, detectives thought Tracy might also be a victim of the same attacker. They searched the house thoroughly, but found no evidence suggesting she had been harmed like her mother. It was possible that Tracy had been kidnapped, placing her in great danger and requiring immediate action. She was added to the missing persons list, and the search for her began. It was unclear who would wish harm on Sandra, a woman who devoted her life to creating a future for her children. When Detective Hutchinson began investigating the case, they considered every possibility, including neighbors and her ex-husband. The aim was to uncover who had a motive for the murder of 48-year-old Sandra Miles and the disappearance of Tracy. Sandra's family, sister, son, and ex-husband were quickly informed of the tragic news. All were in shock. Sandra seemed to have no enemies and was known as a kind and gentle person who worked hard to overcome life's difficulty and support her daughter. It was hard to believe anyone could be so cruel to someone defenseless. Tracy's brother, Chad, made an appeal through the newspaper, asking locals to help find Tracy, his only surviving family member who had been taken from him. Forensic experts have revealed harrowing details of Sandra's last moments. Sandra had been knocked to the ground by repeated blows to her head with a blunt object. While she was incapacitated, a power cord was used to strangle her. The presence of large bruises and internal bleeding indicated she endured a prolonged and violent assault. The medical examiner believed there were likely at least 2 attackers. Investigators suggested that the incident was a robbery gone wrong, possibly triggered when Sandra confronted the intruders as they attempted to steal from her home. Sandra might have seen them, then a fight broke out, and they murdered her because they were afraid she would report to the police. However, after inspecting the crime scene, detectives found this scenario unlikely. There were no signs of a break-in, and the house lost nothing except Tracy's favorite car. It didn't make sense to commit murder for the sake of theft. The brutality of the Sandra's injuries was notable. An ordinary robber wouldn't have wasted time with strangulation. They would have shot her to avoid confrontation. The severe damage to her upper body indicated that the injuries were not a result of panic from being caught, but rather a deliberate attack meant to kill. This level of cruelty suggested a culmination of a long-standing feud. Another possibility considered was that of a maniacal attacker, but generally, such individuals act alone. This crime, however, was clearly carried out by multiple people given the severity of the injuries. Now, the killers had taken Tracy captive, making it urgent to locate the criminals. The detectives believed that Sandra had willingly let her attackers into the house, as there were no signs of forced entry. Therefore, they recognized the need to continue the investigation. The police contacted all of Sandra's relatives, friends, neighbors, and co-workers as part of their investigation. The police focused particularly on her ex-husbands, as they might have motives rooted in resentment. Sandra's third husband, Jerry, who struggled with alcoholism, drew significant attention. He may have been unhappy after the divorce, and the detectives speculated that he could have confronted Sandra while intoxicated, possibly leading to her death. However, the detectives defined that he had an alibi, so he was removed from the list of suspects. Police interviewed all of Sandra's acquaintances to identify suspects in the violent massacre and possibly Tracy's kidnapping. Sandra's sister, Pat, informed detectives that she last saw Sandra alive 5 days earlier. On that day, she received a work call around the same time Tracy visited the school where she studied, making it a key date in the investigation. Efforts to gather information from friends and acquaintances were unproductive, so detectives turned to the neighbors. They discovered that the neighborhood was peaceful and close-knit, where everyone was familiar with one another. The next day, news of the incident at Sandra's house spread quickly. A crowd gathered in the yard and driveway, prompting the police to restrict access to the area. Many neighbors stopped by out of curiosity, anxious to learn what had happened. There was a growing concern in everyone, as they realized a dangerous killer, and possibly a kidnapper, was still at large, especially since there had been no word from Tracy. Fortunately, some witnesses in the crowd provided valuable information to the detectives. A neighbor who lived directly across the street reported seeing Tracy about 5 days earlier, on March 25th. He had noticed her with 2 young men. They all got into one of the guy's cars and drove away, and he never saw them again. This account raised questions about the nature of Tracy's disappearance, as it didn't fit the typical scenario of a schoolgirl being kidnapped. The friends, identified as Mark and Jay, lived nearby, so the detectives decided to interview them at their homes. Mark quickly left as several police officers spotted a red car in the distance. When Mark noticed the police approaching, he sped away and vanished at high speed. This behavior seemed suspicious, so one of the detectives alerted the patrol nearby about his direction. Mark wouldn't have fled so rapidly if he weren't trying to hide something from the police. Luckily, it didn't take long for them to catch up. Mark was eventually stopped just a few kilometers from his home. Mark was driving his car with a friend who was anxious about the recent tragedy at Sandra's house. The two young men attempted to convince the police that their fear was the only reason for their unusual behavior, but seasoned detectives sensed they were hiding something. Consequently, both were taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, the young men insisted they were merely frightened by the news of the incident at the Miles residence. Their stories closely matched, but the police found no solid evidence against them, so they were released. However, they became important witnesses because the police were aware that Tracy had recently been in a relationship with a young man named Jeremy Bell. They also knew that Sandra disapproved of him, believing he would have a negative impact on her daughter's life. Eventually, Tracy broke up with Jeremy and started dating Paul Nelson. Several witnesses stated that shortly before the tragedy, Tracy had a significant argument with her mother over Jeremy and Paul, both of whom Sandra disapproved. Detectives began interviewing numerous teenagers connected to this group. It was established that Tracy's ex, Jeremy, had a volatile temperament and had even made threats against Paul. However, Paul was not the main reason for Tracy and Jeremy's breakup. That was largely due to Sandra's disapproval, which may have prompted Jeremy's hostility toward her. In fact, the relationship between Sandra and Jeremy was extremely strained. Sandra had to go to the police station to obtain a restraining order against Jeremy. He accused her of ruining his relationship with her daughter, Tracy, and threatened her, although he never acted on these threats. During drunken parties, he often expressed how much Sandra bothered him to his friends. Sandra was determined to protect her daughter from him, which only led to more conflicts. It was known that Jeremy was already on the police's radar due to his numerous violations, and the restraining order worsened the situation. He clearly held a grudge against Sandra, which raised concerns that he could have kidnapped Tracy. At this point, detectives believed that Jeremy had killed Sandra and was now holding Tracy captive. They decided to question Jeremy, who, along with his friend William Lennon, had been arrested for burglary on the 1st of the month, just a few days before Sandra's murder. Since Jeremy was in prison during the time of the murder, he could not have been involved in Sandra's death. The fate of Tracy remained uncertain. The kidnapper had not made any demands, leading the police to fear that she might already be dead, although there was still a chance she was being held hostage. Time was of the essence for her safety. When investigators spoke with Jeremy in prison, he explained that he was not in a relationship with Tracy at the time of Sandra's murder due to a restraining order that required him to avoid contact with her. As a result, they broke up. During this time, Tracy began dating another man, Paul Nelson, which led Jeremy to distance himself from her. The police noticed that Jeremy appeared to strongly dislike Paul and openly expressed a desire to confront. Jeremy accused Paul of encouraging Tracy to engage in criminal behavior and worried that she might become involved with drugs because of her relationship with him. However, he stated that he did not harbor any ill feelings toward Sandra. In fact, their communication improved once Tracy started dating Paul. As Sandra shifted her anger towards Paul, Jeremy supported Sandra during this time. On March 25th, just before Sandra's murder, Jeremy warned Tracy about her new boyfriend, Paul, whom he considered dangerous. By that time, the autopsy results were complete. The medical examiner determined that Sandra died on March 26th from 4 stab wounds and significant blunt force trauma to the head. These injuries were confirmed as the cause of death, and strangulation was also used to ensure she was dead. The police needed to locate Paul Nelson, the main suspect, to question him. However, he was missing. His parents reported that he hadn't been seen since March 26th. Like Tracy, detectives believed he was involved in Sandra's murder. They needed to find him and uncover what happened to Tracy, but they could only address that after detaining him. Investigators discovered that Paul had been in regular contact with his friend Zwickel, with whom he had lived before going into hiding. When detectives spoke with Zwickel, he provided valuable information. He confirmed that Sandra did not approve of the relationship between Tracy and Paul. Sandra believed that Paul, Tracy's new boyfriend, was a bad influence and was trying to get her involved with drugs. Despite Sandra's objections, Tracy and Paul continued to meet secretly. After several weeks, Sandra found out about it and was upset. She told her daughter that getting involved with a drug addict was a big mistake. Despite this, she refused to face the truth. Her mother urged her to end the relationship with Paul. Sandra then informed Tracy that if she wanted a family and children, she would need to move in with Paul. This news surprised both Tracy and Paul, as they had nowhere to live. Sandra advised Tracy to think about ending her pregnancy, and Tracy consented. However, their relationship worsened after the abortion. A shocking moment for Tracy was when Sandra threatened to take her car keys if she didn't end her relationship with Paul. This tension may have led Paul to develop a grudge against Sandra, who he and Tracy saw as an obstacle to their relationship. Paul's friend, Zwickel, reported that on March 26th, Paul returned home around 10 a.m. and immediately began packing his belongings. Paul mentioned that he was planning to leave with Tracy and that they had $2,000, which he believed would be sufficient for their escape. Paul confided in Zwickel that he and Tracy intended to run away in her car, and Zwickel assumed they were fleeing due to a disagreement. However, Paul did not mention Sandra's death to Zwickel. When Zwickel inquired about how Paul obtained the money, he claimed he had sold Sandra's tape recorder to a pawn shop. It was later discovered that tape recorder had indeed gone missing from the house after the attack. In reality, Paul was not being truthful. Selling tape recorder only netted him less than $50. It remained unclear how Paul could have acquired such a significant amount of money at that time. Afterwards, Zwickel noticed how Paul and Tracy got into a car and drove away without any signs of stress. It seemed they were heading to Mexico. Given the situation, Zwickel began to suspect that Paul might be involved in a murder. As a result, Paul and Tracy were placed on a nationwide wanted list. Investigators in Kansas identified 18-year-old Paul Nelson as the prime suspect. The police were particularly troubled by the $2,000 Paul had, which he used to flee. They wondered if he had robbed someone or committed another crime. Investigators were shocked, and they examined Sandra's bank accounts. On March 26th, her daughter, Tracy, withdrew money from her mother's account. While looking into this, detectives discovered that Tracy had gone to the bank with Paul and cashed a check with the teller. Tracy claimed that her mother had given her the money to buy a new car. This raised serious suspicions about her actions. A bank employee reported that Tracy and Paul were calm during the transaction and showed no signs of worry. Amid suspicions that Tracy may have been a hostage in a kidnapping, police now have new suspicions. It seemed Paul's friend, Zwickel, was telling the truth. Could Tracy actually be a willing participant in the crime instead of a hostage? To investigate further, they reached out to Tracy's best friend, Candace Keno. Candace revealed that on March 25th, Tracy had called her to share that a serious conflict had erupted with her mother. Tracy's mother had taken the car key away from her and threatened to kick her out. This created evident hostility between them. Candace mentioned that following this incident, Tracy decided to run away with Paul and admitted this during their phone conversation. The officers' doubts were confirmed. It became clear that from the very beginning, no one had actually tried to keep Tracy as a hostage. The police confirmed that Tracy and Paul had crossed the border into Mexico and subsequently got lost. After some time, a United States Border Service officer informed the police that Tracy and Paul had re-entered the U.S. near El Paso. The reason for their return was unclear, but it was evident that they were in trouble. Efforts to locate the couple intensified. On April 8th, Candace contacted investigators to report that she had spoken with Tracy on the phone. Candace provided the police with Tracy's phone number. Tracy and Paul was located on the outskirts of El Paso, and later, that day, investigators apprehended Paul. Candace agreed to make another call to help detectives pinpoint the location from which Tracy had called. Tracy and Paul was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. Paul did not appear to be a dangerous gangster. He kept his eyes on the floor and trembled with fear. He explained the details of the attack, admitting that on the evening of the 25th, he had gone to the house Sandra's. Then, Tracy and Paul had devised an escape plan, and it was Tracy who proposed drastic measures. She wanted to kill her mother to prevent her from ever finding her. The next morning, Candace stopped by to pick up Tracy, and they left for school together. Meanwhile, Paul was hiding in the bedroom with a tree branch he intended to use as a weapon. He claimed he found it in the house and did not plan to kill Sandra. He only wanted to strike her so she would lose consciousness. However, the police were skeptical of his explanation. They questioned why he would sneak into the house and attack her if he didn't intend to kill her, knowing she could eventually regain consciousness and report him. It seemed clear to the investigators that his intention was murder, which would allow him to escape without being caught. Paul continued his story. He claimed that Sandra surprised him by opening the door and immediately began yelling and insulting him. In a fit of anger, he wrapped a cord around Sandra's neck and strangled her until she stopped breathing. Afterward, he covered she with a blanket and fled the scene. Meanwhile, Tracy, smiling, testified in the next room. Their accounts were similar, except for how much blame they placed on each other. Tracy asserted that she did not act alone. She claimed that she and Paul planned the murder together, but only Paul killed her mother. Tracy insisted that she had no role in the crime. She also revealed that the wooden figurine used in the murder was hidden in the backyard. The police later found the figurine there, along with Sandra's blood on it. The prosecutor's office was prepared to charge Tracy and Paul with first-degree murder. According to state law, the maximum penalty for this crime was life imprisonment. Paul's defense argued that he acted under Tracy's influence, claiming he should be guilty of manslaughter instead. Conversely, Tracy's lawyer argued that Paul was the instigator, as he was the one who strangled Sandra, while Tracy played a secondary role. The trial began on February 26, 1999, with both defense teams trying to downplay their clients' involvement in the horrific crime to lessen their possible sentences. During the trial, the young defendants, Tracy and Paul, displayed disrespectful behavior and laughed provocatively. Tracy refused to meet with her family, even though they wanted to discuss her involvement in Sandra's murder. Her brother, Chad, particularly wished to speak with her. On April 22, 1999, the court sentenced Tracy Miles and Paul Nelson to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years before they can apply for parole. After the judge announced the sentence, Paul made an obscene gesture. Both Tracy and Paul expressed dissatisfaction with the verdict and showed no signs of remorse for their actions. In the future, Tracy and Paul will have the chance to request early release, but Sandra's relatives hope that this does not occur. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Greg Mulvahill, Diana Lovejoy, and Greg Mulvahill, both living far from their families, met through an online dating site in 2005. They quickly formed a strong bond, and their relationship soon turned serious. The couple then decided to move in together in San Diego. Diana had always been passionate about athletics and fitness, starting with playing sports in high school and eventually becoming a competitive triathlete. The couple shared a love for the outdoors, which played a significant role in their relationship. During the 2000s, San Diego was emerging as a major tech hub, and Diana and Greg took advantage of the abundant job opportunities. Both Diana and Greg excelled in their careers, with Diana being known for her dependability by her coworkers. After 2 years of dating, they got married in 2007, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. For their honeymoon, they chose Costa Rica, where they attended surf school. Diana and Greg were deeply in love during the early years of their marriage. They shared a passion for life and made the most of every opportunity that came their way, enjoying countless adventures together. After their wedding, they moved to Carlsbad, a picturesque suburb north of San Diego, which offered a perfect blend of natural beauty, outdoor activities, and seclusion. Diana was immediately smitten with the area and felt like she was living her dream when she settled into her ideal home. However, 3 years into their marriage, their relationship started to take a turn. Diana began to experience symptoms that led her to believe she had fibromyalgia, a chronic condition characterized by widespread pain and tenderness in specific areas of the body. Although the exact cause of fibromyalgia remains unknown, several factors are thought to contribute to its development. Diana's fibromyalgia diagnosis significantly impacted her marriage to Greg. Previously an energetic and adventurous person, she struggled to adapt to her new limitations, including reduced stress and rest. This sudden change in lifestyle created challenges for their relationship as a couple. In 2011, Greg took Diana on a relaxing vacation to Santa Cruz, California, to help her cope with her condition. As a caring husband, Greg recognized the toll fibromyalgia was taking on Diana's well-being, including constant muscle pain, fatigue, and limited energy. The illness made it difficult for her to maintain her job, and eventually Diana had to step away from her career to focus on managing her symptoms. She began spending more time at home in Carlsbad. Above all, Diana's greatest desire was to be a mother, to love and raise a child, to be confident and happy. Diana and Greg had been trying to have a child for years, but unfortunately, Diana suffered multiple miscarriages. These losses took a toll on Diana, affecting her both physically and emotionally. Although she didn't have children, she poured her love into her 2 beloved cats, Lanny and Turtle. However, her world was turned upside down when Turtle fell ill and eventually passed away. To comfort Diana during this difficult time, Greg surprised her with a new kitten, which she named Taffy. This thoughtful gesture brought Diana immense comfort. In a surprising turn of events, Diana discovered she was pregnant after years of unsuccessful attempts to conceive. Overjoyed, Greg looked forward to becoming a father, while Diana felt her dream of motherhood finally within reach. In September 2012, Diana gave birth to a baby boy, and Greg took time off work to bond with their newborn son. Greg loved being a father and cherished every moment with his son. Diana, on the other hand, was always worried about her son's health and happiness. As time passed, she started to suspect that her son might have a similar condition to her fibromyalgia. However, Greg was convinced that their son was healthy and didn't see any reason to worry. Despite their differing opinions on their son's health, Diana remained convinced that her son was ill. She began researching extensively and discovered a medication called guaifenesin, which was similar to Mucinex and often used to treat chest infections. Some people believed it could also alleviate fibromyalgia symptoms. Diana was determined to give her son high doses of guaifenesin, but Greg strongly opposed the idea, fearing it was unnecessary and could harm their son. This disagreement over their son's health care created growing tension in their marriage. Diana and Greg's marriage became increasingly strained after Greg suffered a shoulder injury that forced him to quit his job. As a result, the household income decreased, and Diana took a sales job to compensate. She also tried to earn extra money by creating online cooking videos, with Greg handling the camera work. However, this venture didn't yield the desired results. Diana also appeared in promotional videos for kitty litter, but this effort also failed to bring in significant revenue. As their financial struggles continued, Diana and Greg's disagreements escalated, particularly regarding their 2-year-old son's health. By this point, they were constantly fighting, and their relationship was in jeopardy. Diana confided in her coworkers that she felt Greg was unhelpful and unsupportive. In July 2014, Greg had a disturbing encounter with a police officer, who questioned him about allegations of abuse made by Diana. According to the officer, Diana had filed multiple police reports against Greg, leading to his removal from the family home. Diana and their son were allowed to stay, leaving Greg to face the consequences of the allegations. Diana told a trusted friend that she had been assaulted by Greg while she was sleeping. She took medication that made her drowsy, and when she started to wake up, she realized Greg was touching her inappropriately without her permission. Diana also accused Greg of sexually abusing their son. The authorities, including Child Protective Services, got involved after Diana made these allegations. Greg denied the accusations and claimed that Diana was only making these charges because he disagreed with her about their son's health issues. In response, Greg filed for divorce from Diana and requested custody of their son. Detectives investigated claims that Greg abused Diana and their son, but found no evidence to support these allegations. In fact, psychiatric evaluations of Greg and the boy revealed no signs of abuse. A judge ultimately dropped the case and granted Greg 50-50 custody of their son, much to Diana's dismay. Despite this, Diana remained committed to being a good mother and distancing herself from Greg and the associated drama. As part of their divorce agreement, Diana stayed in the house and agreed to compensate Greg for his share of the property. By 2016, the former couple had managed to establish a relatively peaceful co-parenting arrangement, with each having equal access to their son. However, this fragile peace was shattered on September 1, 2016, when the Carlsbad Police Department received a call from Jason Kovac, a friend of Greg's. Jason called 911 to report that his friend Greg had been shot multiple times and was bleeding severely. A patrol officer from the Carlsbad Police Department responded immediately and found Jason and Greg on the side of the road. Jason told the officer that the shooting had occurred about half a mile away. The officer quickly realized that waiting for an ambulance would put Greg's life at risk, so he decided to drive Greg to the hospital himself. Meanwhile, the SWAT team arrived and began searching the area for the shooter, but they couldn't find anyone. At the hospital, doctors rushed Greg into emergency surgery, where they discovered he had a gunshot wound to his chest. Greg survived the surgery, but he was placed on life support afterwards. While Greg recovered in the hospital, detectives interviewed Jason, who was still shaken by the event. Jason explained that Greg had received a call from a private investigator claiming to have important documents related to his custody and divorce proceedings with Diana. The investigator didn't leave his name, but he gave Greg a specific meeting time and location. Greg was initially hesitant, but his curiosity got the better of him, and he asked Jason to come along for backup. Jason agreed, and they armed themselves with a flashlight and a child's baseball bat. They arrived at the remote location, which was extremely dark due to the new moon. The only light came from a small sliver of the moon. According to Jason, the caller instructed Greg to find a package attached to an electricity pole. When Greg saw the package, he walked towards it with his flashlight, scanning the area. Suddenly, he shouted, and a gunshot rang out. Greg and Jason started running for their lives, with bullets whizzing past their heads. They eventually reached their car, where Jason realized Greg had been shot, and called 911. Jason couldn't provide a detailed description of the shooter, but he led the detectives to the exact location of the shooting. During their investigation, they found an intriguing clue near the electricity pole, a neatly folded Angry Birds towel that seemed to be intentionally left there to deceive Greg. Jason reported hearing 6 gunshots, but the investigators found no evidence of shell casings or a weapon. This lack of forensic evidence suggested that the shooter was experienced and knowledgeable about covering their tracks. During their search, the detectives noticed a strong smell of feces in the air, which led them to a pile of feces accompanied by a towel that seemed to have been used for cleanup. The investigators preserved the feces sample and towel as potential evidence, carefully packaging and transporting them to the crime lab for analysis. However, obtaining DNA evidence from the feces sample could take up to a month. In the meantime, the detectives continued their search for a suspect, investigating all available evidence and following up on leads. They focused on Greg's estranged wife, Diana Lovejoy, and questioned her about her possible involvement in the shooting. Diana denied any knowledge and provided an alibi, stating she was at home with her son at the time of the shooting. Greg unexpectedly woke up from life support and began to recover. When he was well enough, he was interviewed by detectives, who asked about his estranged wife's potential involvement. Greg expressed doubt that Diana was capable of such violence, but acknowledged their past conflicts and ongoing divorce and custody battle over their son. The detectives acquired the phone number used to lure Greg to the remote area, which led them to a pay-as-you-go plan and a purchase at Best Buy near Carlsbad. They obtained video footage of the purchase, which showed Diana Lovejoy buying the phone. This solidified her as the prime suspect, and she was arrested during a traffic stop. Diana claimed innocence during her arrest, but when confronted with the evidence, she admitted to buying the phone. She then revealed that she was afraid of Greg, had purchased a gun, and took shooting classes at Iron Sights, where she met instructor Weldon McDavid, an ex-Marine weapons expert. Diana's friendship with Weldon turned romantic and intimate. She told the detective that they planned to scare her estranged husband Greg to stop his harassment. Weldon told Diana to buy a specific phone, which they used to lure Greg to a remote location. Diana claimed Weldon's role was only to threaten Greg, not to use violence. She drove Weldon to the site and picked him up afterwards. When she heard police sirens, Weldon told her he had to shoot Greg in self-defense because Greg allegedly made aggressive moves towards him. Diana denied involvement in the shooting and said she never asked Greg to take violent action against her. She was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Greg recovered from his gunshot wound and was released from the hospital. However, news of Diana's involvement horrified people. Weldon was tracked down and brought in for questioning. Weldon told the detectives he was at home 30 minutes away on the night of the shooting. When asked for a DNA sample, Weldon became nervous. The detectives asked if his DNA would be at the crime scene, and Weldon claimed to remember stopping to use the bathroom on a dirt road the night before. The detectives obtained a search warrant and found a rifle with a live round and 6 spent shell casings in Weldon's garage. The shell casings matched a witness's account of hearing 6 gunshots. Weldon was arrested for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Searching Diana's house, the detectives found a suspicious search history on her computer. She had searched for new moon, which coincided with the night of the shooting. This was significant because there was minimal ambient light during new moons, making it a suitable time for the murder. The detectives concluded that Diana had premeditated knowledge of the shooting and a motive to kill Greg. She would have had to pay him $120,000 in their divorce settlement, and eliminating him would be easier than paying the debt. Diana Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid's trial began in October 2017. Weldon claimed he never intended to shoot Greg. Weldon claimed his goal was only to scare Greg, but the situation escalated when either Greg or Jason yelled, "I got a gun." Weldon stated that, as a skilled marksman, if he had wanted to kill Greg, he would have been able to do so. However, the prosecution presented a different theory. They argued that Weldon did not shoot and kill Greg because Greg shone a flashlight in Weldon's eyes, disorienting him due to the darkness. Having sat in the dark for an extended period, Weldon's sense of direction was impaired. This ultimately saved Greg's life. The jury found Diana Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Upon hearing the verdict, Diana collapsed, although the state believes she was faking it. Weldon was sentenced to 50 years to life, while Diana was sentenced to 26 years to life. Both maintain their innocence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Bianca Roberson. Bianca Roberson, born on October 17, 1998, Bianca grew up to be a remarkable individual. She excelled at Bayard Rustin High School, earning straight A's and graduating with honors. Her impressive academic record earned her a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University in Florida, where she planned to major in criminal justice and pursue her dream of becoming an FBI forensic agent. Bianca was a multi-talented young woman who had been involved in various activities throughout her life. She was a Girl Scout, a cheerleader, and a basketball player. She also had a passion for music, taking lessons in flute, violin, clarinet, and guitar. Additionally, she was an artist. Bianca lived with her mother and maternal grandmother, Josephine Perry, and was excited to experience the independence and challenges of dorm life. However, her plans were tragically cut short. On June 28, 2017, Bianca, her mother, and grandmother went shopping at Walmart to prepare for her upcoming move to Florida. Bianca Roberson was tragically killed in a car accident on a road she knew well. The incident occurred just 10 minutes after she left a Walmart parking lot. Witnesses quickly called 911, and first responders rushed to the scene. Unfortunately, paramedics were unable to save Bianca, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Initial observations suggested that Bianca's severe head injuries were caused by her car veering off the road. However, as police interviewed eyewitnesses, a crucial detail emerged. A witness reported that Bianca's car had collided with a red pickup truck, which had fled the scene without stopping. As she drove home to meet her granddaughter, Bianca's grandmother was worried about the traffic and wondered if it might be related to Bianca. However, she had no idea that the cause of the traffic jam was actually a car crash involving Bianca. When she arrived home, she was met with devastating news. 2 police officers were waiting to inform her that Bianca had been killed in the accident. For Michelle, Bianca's mother, the news was almost too much to bear. Losing a child is every parent's worst nightmare. Michelle, a nurse from Delaware County, was still grieving the loss of her 22-year-old son, M.L. James Rowley, who had passed away from a heart condition in 2013. She had hoped that time would ease her pain, but instead, it had only intensified with the loss of her daughter. Michelle Robertson is struggling to cope with the loss of her second child. "I'm just existing," she said, feeling lost and without purpose. Her children were her reason for getting up in the morning, and now she feels like a mom without kids. After her divorce from Rodney Robertson in 2006, they managed to put aside their differences and work together as amicable co-parents thanks to their daughter Bianca. Michelle acknowledged that their divorce was not easy, but Bianca's presence helped to calm the tension. "Bianca didn't like it when I spoke harshly to her mother, and she would correct me," he said. Bianca's love for her family, especially her father, brought them closer together. Rodney admitted that Bianca was his favorite, and her devotion to family was inspiring. Bianca's father proudly said that his daughter was one step closer to achieving her dream of becoming an FBI forensic specialist. Bianca was excited to be on her own, but her future career was her main focus. Her hard work had paid off, as she had received a 4-year merit scholarship to Jacksonville University, one of the 3 schools that had accepted her out of the 4 she had applied to. Bianca's father said she had also been accepted to Coastal Carolina and the University of Georgia. Investigators were seeking CCTV footage to confirm the initial belief that Bianca's car veered off the road after colliding with a red pickup truck. If this were the case, it would imply that Bianca's death was no accident, but rather a deliberate act that required the police to identify a perpetrator. However, the truth revealed during the investigation proved even more stunning. While awaiting the CCTV footage, a significant development in the case occurred. It was initially assumed that Bianca's death resulted from her car crashing and hitting her head. Yet, during the autopsy, forensic experts made a startling discovery. There was a bullet in Bianca's head. This revelation drastically altered the course of the investigation. What initially seemed like an accident, and later a collision with a red pickup truck, was revealed to be a death caused by a gunshot wound to the head. The autopsy report's findings prompted detectives to meet with Bianca's family, bringing devastating news that her death was no accident. This revelation sent shockwaves, especially for her mother, Michelle, who couldn't fathom why anyone would harm her daughter. Bianca had a close-knit relationship with those around her, and her family couldn't identify anyone who might have wished her harm. Desperate for answers, the Robertson family relied on investigators to identify the person responsible for Bianca's tragic death. Upon reviewing the security footage from the Walmart her family visited on the day of her death, detectives found no suspicious activity. The detectives closely examined the family's actions from the moment they left their cars to the time they departed the parking lot. They dismissed the possibility that someone from Walmart could have followed Bianca and shot her, as she had not argued with anyone during their visit. The family had simply shopped, loaded their purchases into Bianca's car, and left. The investigation suggested that the motive for Bianca's death might be linked to an incident that occurred while she was driving home on the highway. Bianca's mother recalled, "We packed all the bags into Bianca's car," referring to the 2009 Chevy Malibu they had purchased for her 16th birthday from CarMax. Michelle recalled that her mother had chosen the car Bianca was driving when she first got her permit. According to Michelle, Bianca's mother said that Bianca had gotten everything she wanted, but Michelle didn't think of her as spoiled. Instead, she believed Bianca was simply loved and also willing to work for the things she desired. In fact, Bianca started her first job at McDonald's when she was 15 and soon switched to a dietary aide position at the White Horse Village retirement community in Delaware County. Michelle remembered that she had received a large number of letters and cards from the residents at White Horse Village who adored Bianca. After the police obtained traffic footage from CCTV cameras, Michelle pointed out that there were no cameras at the exact location where Bianca veered off the road. However, there was a camera about a mile away. To help illustrate the location, Michelle suggested looking at Google Maps. According to the map, Bianca lost control of her car, where two lanes merged into one. When investigators reviewed the recording, they found evidence that supported the account of Bianca's encounter with the driver of the red pickup truck. The footage showed the cars traveling side by side, approaching a point where the lanes merged into one. It's possible that the conflict began when one driver failed to yield to the other. Given the tragic outcome, investigators inferred that the driver of the red pickup truck might have been the one who fired the shot. However, the poor quality of the footage made it impossible to read the pickup truck's license plates or see the driver's face. Nevertheless, from that point on, the driver of the pickup truck became the primary suspect in Bianca Roberson's death. Detectives were tasked with identifying the man, but they only had a blurry image to work with. After inquiring with Bianca's family members, it became clear that none of them knew anyone who owned a red pickup truck. The police then re-interviewed the witnesses who were present at the scene and those who had called 911, but unfortunately, none of them had caught a glimpse of the vehicle's license plate. The Bianca Roberson family has received an outpouring of support from friends, strangers, and people of all ages since Bianca's passing. A vigil was held just 2 days after her death, and many have reached out to share their stories and condolences. Bianca's family describes her as a selfless and compassionate person who always put the needs of others before her own. According to her mother, Michelle, Bianca would often take in children who were in need, even if it meant sneaking them into their home without permission. When confronted about her actions, Bianca would simply say that she wanted to help others in the same way she would want someone to help her if she were in a similar situation. This kind of empathy and kindness was evident in many aspects of Bianca's life, including the time she witnessed a car accident and immediately asked her mother if they could stop to help. A kind-hearted woman's first instinct was to invite those eating alone to join her family for dinner. In the aftermath of Bianca's car accident, investigators analyzed footage from distant cameras to determine the direction of the red pickup truck involved in the incident. To gather more details about the truck, including its brand, model, and license plate, they required higher quality footage. The police sought the public's assistance through the media, asking anyone with information about the truck to come forward. Following the accident, the pickup truck turned towards Plea Pike. To find evidence, detectives visited nearby houses and shops, searching for cameras that might have captured the truck. After an extensive search, they found a camera with good quality footage, taken around 5 minutes after witnesses called 911 to report Bianca's car accident. Upon analyzing this footage, detectives saw the red pickup truck driving by shortly after the incident. The investigation continued, but the license plate of the suspect's car remained unknown, and it was unclear if the car in the footage was the same one or just a similar vehicle. However, 2 days after the incident, a new lead emerged when a woman contacted the police, claiming to have seen the car they were searching for. She also reported seeing the driver's face. She described the car as a red pickup truck that overtook her, stopped at the Poi Pike intersection, and then turned left. This information was crucial in narrowing down the search area, and also revealed that the pickup truck in the footage was not the actual suspect's vehicle, but rather a similar-looking truck. Her description helped a forensic artist create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white male, 25 to 35 years old, with brown hair and a stubble beard. The police released the suspect's sketch, hoping someone would recognize the person and come forward. They showed the sketch to Bianca's family, but no one recognized the individual. As the investigation continued, detectives began to consider the possibility that Bianca's death was a hate crime. To gather more evidence, the police canvassed the area where the red pickup truck was last seen, visiting homes and businesses near the intersection where it turned left. They were searching for a high-quality surveillance recording that could provide answers to their questions. Their efforts paid off when a homeowner, who lived less than half a mile from the intersection, provided the police with a recording from their driveway surveillance camera. By estimating the time it would take to drive from the crime scene to the homeowner's location, the police quickly found the relevant footage. Although the new footage was of better quality than the previous one, its angle made it impossible for the police to identify the car or its driver. The police worked hard to find another recording from a closer camera, and they got lucky. Although the license plate was not visible, they were able to identify some unique features of the car. These features included a sticker on the right side window, a vertical dent on the passenger door, and damage to the hood. With these details, the police had a much better chance of finding the car. The police sought the public's help in finding the truck and its driver by offering a $5,000 reward for any information that could aid in the investigation. They were confident that someone would recognize the distinctive vehicle. 3 days after Bianca Roberson's death, a lawyer contacted the police station on behalf of a client who wanted to turn himself in, stating that his client was connected to the incident that resulted in Bianca's death. The incident occurred on a recent Wednesday at approximately 5:30 p.m. Bianca Roberson, an 18-year-old who had just graduated from Westchester Ruston High School, was driving on Route 100, a two-lane highway, on her way to Jacksonville University. Her life was full of promise, with a loving family and a bright future ahead. As she approached the merge with Route 202, the road narrowed from 2 lanes to 1. A common merge on a southeastern Pennsylvania highway turned deadly last Wednesday when a dispute over positioning escalated into violence. Bianca Roberson was merging from 2 lanes to 1 when a man in a red pickup truck, also merging, became agitated and shot her in the head. The suspect, 28-year-old David Desper of Pennsylvania, surrendered to police with his lawyer. Although he refused to testify, he consented to a search of his home and revealed the location of his pickup truck. David was subsequently arrested and charged with Bianca Roberson's murder. The police tracked down the suspect's vehicle, a pickup truck, at a location David had previously mentioned. Unique features on the truck, such as stickers on the windows and damage to the body, made it unmistakably clear that it was the same truck involved in the crime. The investigators searched David's residence and found the firearm that was used to shoot and kill Bianca Roberson. Despite this major breakthrough in the case, the authorities remained baffled as to the killer's motivation. Over 800 loved ones and members of the community attended a heart-wrenching farewell ceremony at the St. Paul's Baptist Church in the suburban Westchester borough, which lies approximately 25 miles during the funeral service. Many people paid tribute to she, including her brothers, officials from her high school, the chief admissions officer from the university she was set to attend, and friends. In his eulogy, Pastor Wayne Croft Sr. drew a comparison between the shooter and 2 other infamous cases, George Zimmerman, who shot and killed Trayvon Martin, a black teenager, in Florida in 2012 and was acquitted of murder in 2013, and Michael Dunn, who shot and killed Jordan Davis, another black teenager, in Florida in 2012 after a dispute over music. Dunn was convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 90 years. The pastor expressed the sentiment of the black community, stating that regardless of whether Bianca's murder was a result of road rage or racism, the fact remains that a brilliant young black woman's life was lost. During the trial in September 2018, David Desper was asked to explain his motive for committing the crime. Instead of providing an answer, he requested forgiveness from Bianca's family. For Bianca's parents, the thought of facing their daughter's alleged killer was daunting. To show their support and unity, Rodney had arranged for family members and friends to wear t-shirts with Bianca's face on the front as they gathered at the Chester County Government Services Center. The family of Bianca Roberson wore bracelets with a poignant message, "Bianca Roberson, a rose in God's garden." They also held a banner that read "Justice for Bianca Nicole Roberson," a reminder of the tragic event that took her life on June 28, 2017. Rodney, Bianca's father, expressed his uncertainty about how he would react when he saw the man responsible for his daughter's murder. "I don't know what I'll do when I see him," he said. "The man who held the gun that took my daughter's life, he just took her dreams away. He had no right to do that." Michelle, Bianca's mother, struggled to come to terms with the loss of her child. "I want to hold her, comfort her, and bring her back," she said through tears. The prosecutor argued that the traffic conflict occurred because Bianca failed to yield when the lanes merged into one. In response, David Desper rolled down the passenger side window and fired a shot. Realizing the severity of his actions, David Desper fled the scene, leaving his pickup truck with a friend in Pennsylvania, and attempted to escape to Delaware. However, after his sketch and the distinctive features of his pickup truck were publicized in the news, David Desper decided to hire a lawyer and surrender. The police investigated his social media accounts and interviewed his friends, but found no evidence to suggest that the crime was motivated by bias. As a result, David Desper was not charged with a hate crime. District Attorney Hogan stated that there was no indication that the crime was racially motivated or a hate crime. However, many people disagreed with this assessment. Before the sentencing, the defense portrayed David Desper as harmless and immature for his age, describing him as a big kid who enjoyed playing with cars in his free time. They argued that David Desper had essentially handed the case to the government by turning himself in. The defense claimed that David Desper was driving home when another car startled him, causing him to fire the gun. They maintained that David Desper was not a menacing individual. Prosecutor Chris Miller countered that a 28-year-old man driving with a loaded firearm is not a big kid. He emphasized that David Desper's actions were those of a responsible adult. Ironically, David Desper's own mother had shared a Facebook post about the police searching for the person who murdered Bianca Roberson, unaware that the suspect was her own son. Wendy Desper expressed her love for Bianca's family and apologized for her son's actions. "I'm so sorry for what my son did," she said as her son wept. Rodney Robertson struggled to speak through tears as he addressed his daughter's killer. "I have simple questions for the defendant," he said. "Why did you shoot my daughter? Was it because of her youth, her race, her gender, or just because you wanted to go first on the road? Was it simply because you were having a bad day?" Rodney continued, "All my dreams for Bianca were coming true until the day the defendant took her life. Now all I have left of Bianca are my memories." David Desper pleaded guilty to third-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Judge Amory Wecraft became emotional as she announced the sentence, telling Desper, "I don't believe you were afraid. I believe it was anger." County Judge Amory Wecraft imposed the maximum sentence of 20 to 40 years for that grade of homicide. David Desper attempted to appeal the sentence, but his appeal was denied. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Michelle Jason Young was born in 1974 in Brevard, North Carolina. Jason grew up in a typical family. After completing high school, he attended the prestigious State University in Raleigh, the state capital. Following graduation, he secured a job as a salesman at a large retail chain. Jason proved to be a valuable and reliable employee, but his friends described him as inconsistent and unpredictable in his relationships. With women, he had a reputation for being a womanizer, often changing partners. Michelle Young was born in February 1977 in New York. She was raised in a close-knit family with her younger sister Meredith and their devoted mother Linda. Linda played a significant role in Michelle's early life, nurturing her passions and talents from a young age. Michelle's interests in law and economics were evident from her school days, and she dreamed of pursuing a career in this field. Michelle's academic journey led her to apply to several universities after high school, eventually gaining acceptance into a top university in North Carolina. There, she pursued her master's degree, and after completing her education, Michelle secured a prestigious job at a leading accounting firm in the state, rapidly establishing herself as a skilled professional. She achieved financial stability, was able to support herself fully. A chance encounter at a bar on Michelle's birthday, when Jason accidentally spilled a cocktail on her. He immediately apologized and offered to buy her another. This kind and thoughtful act caught Michelle's attention, and they began chatting. As they talked, they discovered that they had a lot in common. They both went to the same college, although Jason graduated 3 years earlier. Their casual conversation quickly turned into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Although they had deep feelings for each other, they had no plans to get married or move in together. At the time, Jason still lived with his parents in Brevard, while Michelle lived in Raleigh. They would see each other on weekends or during Jason's business trips to Raleigh. During one of their meetings, Michelle dropped a bombshell. She was pregnant. This news came as a shock to both of them, as they were not yet ready to become parents. Jason and Michelle were young and focused on their careers, with no immediate plans to start a family. However, when Michelle became pregnant, she decided to keep the baby after some initial hesitation. Jason took a month to come to terms with the situation, and then relocated to be closer to Michelle. After a few months, they got married, but it wasn't due to love or the pregnancy. Instead, it was because Michelle lacked health insurance, and the cost of childbirth would have been prohibitively expensive. Marriage provided a solution to this financial burden. Their daughter, Cassidy Elizabeth, was born in the spring of 2004. Michelle threw herself into domestic life and family responsibilities with the help of her mother and younger sister. Although Michelle's family was wary of Jason, they tried to avoid conflicts and accepted him as part of their family. Later that year, the young family moved into a large house in a quiet neighborhood. Michelle's mother, Linda, came to visit to help with housework and noticed a tense atmosphere in the home. Jason had a bad temper and often started arguments. Michelle tried to downplay these incidents and appear cheerful. However, she confirmed with her mother the true state of their relationship, which seemed ominous. When Cassidy was just 2 years old, Michelle found out she was pregnant again. She was nervous about sharing the news with her husband, but he took it calmly and even seemed happy. The family decided to visit Jason's parents in Brevard to share the news in person. They spent the weekend celebrating with relatives, and on Monday they left Cassidy with the grandparents for a few hours and went out to dinner. To celebrate the event, as they were driving home, Jason, who was driving, overturned and the car went off the road into a ravine. They were left very frightened with a few scrapes and bruises, but their lives were not in danger. However, Michelle had suffered a miscarriage, so Michelle was very worried. Jason was surprisingly calm about the accident. Before the accident, during a business trip, Jason met an old college friend, Michelle Money. She had the same name as Jason's wife, Michelle. Jason told his wife about it. They decided to invite Michelle Money to visit their home, and she agreed. During her visit, Michelle Money began to complain about her unhappy family life. At the same time, Michelle Money kept complimenting Jason and telling his wife that she was lucky to be pregnant. Michelle was not worried about Michelle Money's behavior, but she genuinely wanted to. Jason and Michelle Money began calling each other every day and secretly meeting each other. Jason always justified his absence with business trips, and his wife could not guess anything. Things got complicated in the summer of 2006 when Michelle found out she was pregnant. Unlike her previous pregnancies, Jason's reaction was unhappy and cold. Michelle attributed his sadness to her previous miscarriage, still not knowing the real reason for his cold behavior. In November, with Michelle 5 months pregnant, Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Michelle, who was pregnant, had a lengthy phone conversation with her best friend discussing family problems and a heated argument she had with her husband the previous night. After the call, her husband left Jason embarked on a 300-mile business trip. Around 10 p.m., Jason arrived at a hotel claiming fatigue from his journey. However, instead of resting, he began to carefully examine the hotel's entrances, exits, and security cameras, planning a way to leave and return undetected. He was creating a solid alibi for a crime he intended to commit. Early the next morning, Jason calls Meredith and asks for her help. He tells her that he wants to surprise his wife with a piece of jewelry for their anniversary, but accidentally sent the order confirmation to their home fax machine. Jason is worried that Michelle will see the gift and ruin the surprise. Even though Meredith doesn't like Jason, she agrees to help him. Meredith arrived at her sister's house, using a secret door in the garage that only family members knew about, and that was always left unlocked. The house was unusually quiet, but Michelle's keys, wallet, and important papers were still in the hallway, suggesting she hadn't left the premises. When Meredith went upstairs, she found the bedroom door wide open, but neither Michelle nor her daughter responded to her calls. When she entered the room, Meredith was met with a horrific scene. Michelle lay on the floor by the bed, her skull fractured and her body surrounded by a large pool of blood. The walls, furniture, and floor were all stained with blood, and tiny footprints were visible next to the body. Sadly, Michelle had been dead for hours. As Meredith rushed to call 911, she heard a faint noise coming from under the bed. When she looked back, she saw Michelle's young daughter, Cassidy, looking at her with a confused expression. Cassidy was unharmed. The little girl had witnessed her mother's brutal death and had spent many hours by her side. A forensic examination of Michelle's body later revealed a series of bruises, abrasions, and broken bones. Her teeth had been broken and her skull had been fractured by a heavy object. A bloody pillow was found next to her body with marks suggesting she had been suffocated by the pillow. The murder investigation revealed some crucial facts. First, nothing was stolen from the house, indicating that the killer's sole intention was to murder the Michelle. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry or broken locks, suggesting that the perpetrator had a key or knew about a secret door that only family members were aware of. Normally, Jason would be the prime suspect, but in this case, Jason seemed to have a solid alibi. He claimed to have checked into the hotel and not left until the morning, then attended a business meeting. Hotel records confirmed that he used a key card to enter and exit the room. However, upon closer inspection, investigators discovered several irregularities in Jason's alibi. A hotel employee found the fire escape open and propped up with a rock. When investigators reviewed surveillance footage to determine who had propped up the rock, they discovered that the camera had been deliberately disabled on the night of the murder. Jason's room was last recorded about half an hour after he checked in. The strange events continued. Later that night, a man resembling Jason stopped at a gas station between the hotel and the crime scene. When asked to show identification as required by the station's rules, he refused, paid with cash, and hastily left without waiting for his change. The on-call attendant identified Jason, but he denied any involvement, claiming that he had spent the night in the hotel room. His actions, however, raised suspicion. On the day before the tragedy, Jason had made more than 24 calls to his wife, Michelle, and 5 more to his mistress, Michelle Money, each lasting less than 15 seconds, suggesting he was in a state of panic. Notably, these calls were made outside the hotel, contradicting his claim that he had been in the room all night. Additionally, Jason was late for a scheduled business meeting with his partners and appeared distracted. While these incidents were suspicious, they did not prove his guilt, so Jason was able to maintain his normal life for nearly 3 years. He even won custody of his young daughter, which was a huge blow to Michelle's family. Jason's case was reopened in 2012 with new evidence. Witnesses reported seeing his distinctive white car near his home on the night of the murders. A child psychologist testified about Jason's daughter, reenacting a disturbing scene with her doll. And Jason's former mistress, Michelle Money, revealed Jason's mood swings and violent outbursts, and that he had confided in her about his marital woes. This testimony helped convict Jason of brutally assaulting his pregnant wife, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. As a result of Jason's actions, his daughter, Cassidy, was left without parents. Her mother was murdered, and her father is in prison for the crime. Cassidy is now being cared for by her aunt and maternal. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of the Hawks couple. Thomas and Jackie Hawks set out on a journey that would lead them straight into the grasp of tragedy. Unaware, they made the decision to sell their prized possession, their luxurious yacht, which would plunge them into a dark abyss. Imagine the sun glistening on the calm waters, a final voyage on their treasured vessel, and a potential buyer about to finalize the deal. As the sails billowed in the wind and the waves murmured their secrets, the Hawks ventured into the unknown, oblivious that this very journey would become their eternal shroud. Thomas Hawks and his brother Jim Hawks grew up on a farm in the heart of California. They shared a passion for surfing the rolling waves and navigating the vast open sea. However, life's twists and turns saw Thomas answering the call of duty, trading the embrace of the ocean and joining the military. He even ventured into the harsh battlegrounds of the Vietnam War, leaving his mark as a veteran. Despite this, his resilience never wavered, and he transitioned into the realm of justice, becoming a dedicated probation officer. Meanwhile, Jim's path led him into the uniform of a police officer, eventually rising to the esteemed position of police chief. Service and duty ran deep in their veins. Thomas was a dedicated bodybuilder. He had sculpted his body, a testament to his unwavering commitment to physical strength. His impressive physique was a symbol of his indomitable will. Life took its course, and Thomas married, bringing 2 sons, Ryan and Matthew, into the world. However, like the changing tides, the journey of their relationship faced unexpected turns, and they ultimately ended up divorcing. Thomas found himself in Prescott, Arizona, starting a new chapter in his life. His sons followed, drawn to their father in this new land. Then, in an unexpected but positive twist of fate, Thomas crossed paths with Jackie. They fell in love, and their hearts entwined, sparking a love that burned brighter than the Arizona sun. However, Jackie carried scars not of the heart, but of life's cruelty, as a past accident had left her unable to bear children of her own. Yet, her love knew no bounds, as she embraced Thomas's sons as her own flesh and blood. This couple had always faced life's demands, with unwavering determination. They toiled ceaselessly, their dreams woven into their hearts. Their aspiration to own a vessel, a testament to their hard-earned rewards, became a reality as they bought themselves a 55-foot yacht. They named it Well-Deserved, a name their loved ones deemed as a fitting and well-deserved reward for their unyielding work ethic. They took the vessel to the next level by equipping it with the most advanced technology. With retirement's golden years ahead, Thomas and Jackie set sail along the picturesque west coast. Mexico's exotic shores, California's rugged coastline, and Catalina Island's enchanting beauty became their playground for the following 2 years. They were without a doubt living the dream they had so ardently envisioned. Life being an ever-evolving story, new chapters beckoned. One of Thomas's sons began a family of his own, with the promise of a grandchild on the horizon. Anticipation filled their hearts, the prospect of becoming grandparents a beacon of joy. Thomas and Jackie then considered the idea of returning to Arizona to be close to their expanding family, and so they made the difficult decision to part with their beloved boat. They decided to sell it in Newport Beach, California, little knowing that this decision would thrust them into the maze of fate, leading to a tragedy they could never have anticipated. The dreams they had so faithfully pursued would take an unexpected and heart-rending turn. In November 2004, they listed their well-deserved yacht for sale at $435,000 through an advertisement in a magazine, choosing to bypass the conventional broker route to save on hefty commissions. With the high price tag for their beloved yacht, which was valued near $500,000, they were confident that the vessel's well-maintained condition would attract eager buyers. But fate had other plans. The first person who responded to their advertisement was not who they had expected. The mysterious individual who reached out was named Skylar Dillion, and what happened next exceeded their expectations. Initially, they were doubtful when they met Dillion. Thomas, a former probation officer, couldn't help but wonder how someone so young had acquired so much wealth. Skylar's explanation, which included a previous career as a child actor, being part of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers cast, and appearing in commercials, had made him rich. Skylar Dillion made a great offer, a full cash offer, sweetened with an additional $15,000 for some personal items he wants to keep on the boat. To further reduce the Hawks' hesitation, he arrived at the meeting with his pregnant wife, Jennifer Henderson, and their young child. Their seemingly happy family had an effect, slowly melting away the Hawks' worries as trust gradually grew. However, under their friendly exterior, Skylar and Jennifer were hiding a treacherous deceit that would lead to serious consequences. The Hawks were unaware of this, as they had developed a strong trust in Dillion. The sea trial, a normal part of boat sales, was set for November 15, 2004, and turned out to be a significant day. Shortly before the trial, on November 12, 2004, the Hawks went on a meaningful trip to Santa Catalina Island near the Los Angeles coast. It was a bittersweet occasion, celebrating the upcoming sale of their beloved boat and one final sail on it. Friends and family were told that a buyer had been found, and the sale was close. On November 15th, as the morning sun illuminated the scene, Skylar and his wife arrived with two men, one slender and the other muscular. The Hawks were surprised by the presence of these two individuals, sparking suspicions. However, Dillian quickly eased their concerns by stating that they were merely acquaintances. He clarified that the well-built man was his accountant. After these explanations, Jennifer and the child stayed behind while the others boarded the boat and set off on their journey. They slowly navigated into the vast open waters, leaving their familiar world behind. Little did they know, this voyage would be their last, mysteriously marking the final time anyone would see them. As the sun set and darkness descended, Carter Ford, the port captain of the Lido Isle Yacht Club and a close friend of the Hawks, looked forward to their evening meeting with anticipation. Plans were in place, and excitement filled the air. However, when night fell over Newport Harbor like a heavy blanket, an unsettling message disrupted the peace. Jackie called with troubling news that made Ford shiver. The Hawks were on a sea trial, which seemed routine, but something felt off. The buyer and his group had kept them out on the water longer than expected, leading to uncertainty. The Hawks promised to contact once they returned, and this was the last anyone heard from them. When the sun rose again, the yacht had returned to Newport Beach, but the couple was nowhere to be found. A puzzling mystery unfolded, as they seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Days passed with no word to their loved ones, their phones silent. To add to the mystery, Jackie's SUV was also missing, leading some to wonder if they had gone on a sudden road trip to enjoy their recent financial success, choosing to disconnect from the world as they celebrated. But the dark reality became clear. The Hawks were not on vacation. Something more sinister had happened to them, and it was only later that they realized this. A week passed, and the unusual silence from the Hawks sparked many questions and concerns. Their loved ones felt the weight of their absence, with a fear that something was wrong. The family turned to Carter Ford in desperation, asking him to go out to the well and investigate. As Ford boarded the boat, he felt a deep sense of concern. Everything seemed to be in disarray, with a lone white towel hanging ominously from one of the portholes. The family was disturbed by the strange scene, and immediately took action by filing a missing persons report. Detectives were called to the scene. They proceeded cautiously, breaking the lock on the cabin door and entering. Inside the boat, there were no signs of violence, but a sinister presence seemed to be lurking in the shadows. Their attention was drawn to a white towel stained with fresh ink, hidden between the bed and the wall. It made them stop and think, prompting disturbing questions. A receipt nearby revealed a troubling list of items: bleach, cleaning supplies, heavy-duty trash bags, and Tums and antacid. The detectives began to connect the pieces of this dark puzzle. The cleaning supplies seemed well suited for a murder, with the trash bags to dispose of evidence, bleach to clean away any traces, and Tums possibly used to calm a stomach unsettled by the horrific acts. The boat had secrets that scared everyone who entered. Investigators were determined to find out the truth about the yacht's buyers, Skylar and Jennifer. A surveillance team was quickly put together to follow them closely. Undercover officers followed the Dillians, observing them living their daily lives seemingly unaffected by suspicion. They were regular volunteers at a local church, and Jennifer's work as a hairdresser presented no unusual facets. To the world, they appeared utterly ordinary, masking their true nature with chilling adeptness. As detectives delved deeper into their backgrounds, a grim portrait emerged. Skylar Dillian's history bore the stain of a prior conviction for burglary, landing him on probation. Financial scrutiny revealed that the couple was drowning in a staggering $87,000 worth of debt, a dire financial abyss. The investigators were puzzled by a question. How did the couple manage to buy a yacht when they were struggling financially? After looking into Skylar's claims of fame on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, they found out he was just an uncredited extra in a few episodes. To add to the mystery, the couple was living in Jennifer's parents' garage. Their desire to own a yacht didn't match their financial situation, leaving the detectives confused. The more they investigated, the more confusing the situation became. Dillian was being questioned intensely, but he stuck to his story that he had bought the yacht legally. Surprisingly, he admitted that the money came from selling drugs. Things got even more intense when he revealed that he had handed over a briefcase full of cleaned money from Mexico, mostly in $100 bills, to Tom. Interestingly, Skylar said that the Hawks had asked him to help with setting up a bank account in Mexico, so they could start a new life there. He also mentioned that Tom and Jackie had given him power of attorney, allowing him to control their money and transfer it to Mexico. To strengthen his story, Schuyler showed what seemed to be a real power of attorney document with signatures that looked real. Despite denying any role in their disappearance and suggesting the couple may have gone to Mexico, doubts remained. Cell phone records showed the Hawks. Phones were near the Mexican border the day after the sea trial with Schuyler. Frustrated detectives went back to square one and refocused on the Hawks family, prioritizing the safety of the couple above all else. They sought answers by going to the national news, where a family member appeared on camera asking for help in finding the missing couple and their car. The mystery only grew deeper, capturing the world's attention with its twists and turns. An American citizen in Mexico called in, sparking action in the investigation. He had seen the car they were looking for on the news, and it was right in front of him. Authorities went to a house near Ensenada in Mexico and found the Hawks' car. Despite the Hawks being missing for over a month and the fear of something bad happening, there was hope that this could be them. There was a glimmer of optimism. Maybe this was the breakthrough they needed. A Mexican federal agent knocked on the door, leading the way. The names Schuyler Dillion and Jennifer came up in the Spanish conversation. The man at the door had a chilling connection. He was an old surfing buddy of Schuyler. He casually mentioned that Schuyler had given him the car, and then Jennifer, his pregnant wife, had driven him back to the U.S. The detectives quickly collected samples from inside the car and found Schuyler's DNA on a heater knob, a significant piece of evidence. This discovery led to suspicions of foul play. The investigators believed that Schuyler and Jennifer may have vital information or knowledge of the events, but concrete proof was still needed. A new development occurred when the detectives looked into a suspicious power of attorney. Theory that Tom and Jackie allowed strangers access to their accounts raised concerns. However, the notary Kathleen Harris supported Schuyler's story, claiming she had witnessed the Hawks signing the papers and confirming their identities with fingerprints. While this aligned with Schuyler's account, the detectives decided to investigate further. They asked Harris to describe Tom and Jackie Hawks. While she accurately described Tom, her portrayal of Jackie raised suspicion. She described Jackie as having brown, curly hair, when in reality she had chopped her long, curly locks and had a spiked blonde hairstyle. Was this confusion or a sinister cover-up? The power of attorney had fingerprints that matched perfectly and seemed to have legitimate signatures. Despite this, there was still a sense of worry. The case was given to the FBI to ease doubts, and the world's best handwriting analysts were brought in. Their discoveries were surprising. Tom's signature was genuine, as was Jackie's. However, there was an oddity in Jackie's signature that left investigators puzzled and struggling to solve the mystery. Armed with the unsettling revelation, the investigators received a tip that Schuyler was going to flee. He had asked his probation officer for permission to leave the country, which helped the quick-thinking detectives quickly catch him for money laundering, the crime he had confessed to earlier. Investigators arrived at the garage apartment where Jennifer's parents resided and found a collection of personal items belonging to Tom and Jackie, such as their camera and driver's licenses. Upon inspecting Jackie's driver's license photo, they were surprised to see a striking resemblance to the notary's description, raising further suspicions about her involvement and the legitimacy of her actions. The investigation took a darker turn, shedding light on the unsettling idea that more people may be involved in this mysterious disappearance than previously thought. As the lies began to unravel, it exposed an intricate web of mysteries and secrets waiting to be revealed. In the garage, investigators found a business card belonging to an LAPD detective who worked with Interpol. They contacted the Interpol agent to discuss their investigation into Schuyler's possible involvement in the Hawks' disappearance. The Interpol agent then shared that he had encountered Schuyler a year earlier during a murder investigation in Mexico involving an American citizen. This connection raised the possibility that Schuyler might have been involved in both cases. The main challenge was to find evidence. Detectives found something strange on the yacht. In photos, it had 2 anchors, but in reality only 1. Their suspicions grew as they realized the discrepancy. A chilling theory started to form. Detectives linked anchor absence on yacht to couple's disappearance due to Schuyler's ruse concealing sinister plot to steal prized possession. Needed undeniable proof. The net was tightening. Jennifer's actions revealed her involvement in the plot. Her effort to drain Hawks' account was evidence of her awareness of the situation, despite not being on the boat. But at a crucial moment, detectives identified a name in the power of attorney papers, a name that would shift the course in solving this puzzling case. The name belonged to a man who had witnessed the significant transaction, a man named Alonso. Alonso, who was only 19 at the time, resided with his parents and worked as a prison guard. A bond had developed between him and Dillian while the latter was in prison for theft. Skylar had convinced Alonso to accompany him to the meetings. He was the slim man who had gone with him on the sea trial. Offering leniency in his punishment, they made an agreement with Alonso, pushing him to share his perspective and expose the chilling truth about the Hawk's destiny. As the tape recorder started playing, Alonso began to tell a frightening story. He revealed details about a man named John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who was introduced as an accountant by Skylar. However, Kennedy was not an ordinary man. He was actually a notorious gang member and former convict known as John F. Kennedy. Alonso explained how they had planned a dangerous scheme that would bring disaster to the Hawks. Their evil plan involved kidnapping a couple and taking them out to sea to throw them overboard. The frightening story began when John F. Kennedy pretended to be seasick and went below deck. Thomas, concerned for him, went down to check on him and fell into their trap. Skylar followed, and together they attacked Thomas. Amidst the chaos, Jackie asked worried questions. Alonso grabbed her, used a taser to immobilize her, handcuffed her, and took her to another part of the boat. Both Thomas and Jackie found themselves helpless, with their eyes and mouths taped shut. In those harrowing moments, as Jackie struggled to scream through her gag with tears of desperation flowing, Thomas offered a small gesture of solace. Handcuffed together, he tenderly stroked her hand with his fingers, a silent attempt to comfort her in the face of the grim fate that awaited them in the merciless hands of their captors. The grim saga continued as they were taken into the kitchen area, where the power of attorney awaited their reluctant signatures. The chilling ultimatum hung in the air like a death knell: cooperate, and perhaps they would be spared, or resist, and death would be their fate. The boat steered into the haunting depths of the ocean near Catalina Island, a place once filled with cherished memories for Tom and Jackie. On the deck of the vessel, they were bound together with a rope, a ghastly prelude to the impending horror. Dillian then disengaged one of the anchors from the boat's bow as he dragged the chain along, the dreadful sound echoing in their ears. They had heard that sound countless times before, but this time it signaled their inexorable doom. Jackie's pleas for her life were heartbreaking as she yearned to see her grandchild and believed she was too young to die. Tom assured her they would be together as they faced the cruel reality, being cast overboard into the Pacific Ocean. They were pushed from their vessel, dragged down by the anchor, disappearing into the depths. Unfortunately, their bodies were never found, shrouding their fate in mystery. After completing their evil deed, Skylar began a cruel mission to eliminate any evidence of the Hawks' presence. He collected their precious belongings, including photographs, and heartlessly threw them into the deep ocean where their memories faded away, abandoned without any regret. With all traces of the couple gone, Dillian and John F. Kennedy tried to return to a sense of normalcy as they sailed back to Newport Harbor, relaxing and fishing as if the terrifying recent events were just a disturbing illusion. Justice caught up with Skylar, Dillian, John F. Kennedy, and Alonzo McHine as they faced 2 counts of first-degree murder. Jennifer Henderson defended her husband's innocence while facing her own reckoning, as she too was charged with 2 counts of murder. Her involvement in the gruesome act was revealed, laying bare her complicity. The chilling murders were driven by a strong desire for money. Myron Gardner, an ex-convict and former gang member, played a key role in connecting Dillian with John F. Kennedy, despite not actively participating in the crime. Gardner faced charges of involuntary manslaughter for his part in these events. Justice was served when different juries found them all guilty. Jennifer Henderson was sentenced to 2 life terms in October 2007 without the chance of parole. John Fitzgerald Kennedy received a death sentence on May 1, 2009, and was placed on death row in San Quentin State Prison. Alonzo McHine testified against the others, pleaded guilty, and received a lighter sentence on June 15, 2009, 20 years and 4 months in prison with the chance of parole in September 2021. In March 2009, Myron Gardner's life changed after spending 4 years in prison. He decided to plead guilty to being an accessory after the crime, which led to the dismissal of the murder charges against him. Meanwhile, Skylar Dillian, also in jail, faced more accusations. He was said to have asked another inmate to carry out a dark plan against his own family members. Things took a darker turn when Dillian was also implicated in the murder of an American citizen named John Jarvie, who was killed in Mexico in 2003. Dillian's cousin and father, who were connected to the Jarvie murder, were considered crucial witnesses in both murder cases. On September 22nd, jury selection began for the trial of Skylar Dillian. Dillian was tried for the murders of Thomas and Jackie Hawks, as well as John Jarvie. The verdict was given on April 10, 2009, with Dillian receiving a death sentence from Judge Frank Feisel in Orange County Superior Court. He was sent to death row at San Quentin State Prison. Before Skylar Dillian was sent to prison, a troubling discovery was made. While incarcerated on March 13, 2008, he performed a disturbing act by partially cutting his own male private part with a razor blade as he wished to remove it. After receiving immediate medical attention, he was taken back to his cell the next day. In an interview, Dillian admitted that his reason for this extreme self-injury was a strong desire to transition to a woman. He had already changed his name from John Julius Jacobson to Skylar Dillian, choosing a gender-neutral name to represent his identity. Defense lawyers claimed that Dillian's need for money to pay for sex reassignment surgery was the hidden reason for the murders of the Hawks. However, it is important to understand that this motive does not justify the terrible crimes he committed. In 2019, Dillian's gender was legally changed to female, and she is now known as Skylar Preciosa Dillian. The Hawks family holds dear the lasting memory of Thomas and Jackie, always engraved in their hearts. These lively individuals, recognized for their adventurous nature, embodied goodness and genuineness. Their destiny took a harsh turn, and even though they have passed away, their spirits persist, shining a timeless light on our recollections. May they rest in eternal peace in paradise. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lorena Bobbitt. It's said that a humiliated and insulted woman is capable of anything, with the most terrifying in this list being revenge. Cruel, ingenious, and sometimes unpredictable. Much in this regard depends on the lady's level of sanity, but one must not overlook the depth of her hurt. This destructive emotion can be carefully hidden within a woman for years, but if it erupts, it will sweep away everything in its path. The story of the Bobbitt spouses in the early 90s shook the world, and their surname became a byword, spawning the verb to bobbit, which means to cut or to chop. This case drew heightened public attention, not just to the issues of domestic violence, but also to such a delicate subject as marital assault, which many try to sidestep. Lorena Leonore Bobbitt was born on May 15, 1970, in the town of Bucuri, located in eastern Ecuador near the province of Chimborazo. She was the youngest child in a simple and very modest family. When she was in elementary school, her family moved to Venezuela and settled in Caracas. Lorena grew up quite clever. She performed well in school, was diligent and goal-oriented. In her teenage years, she lost her father, and her relationship with her mother, Elvia Gallo, was quite strained. As soon as she graduated from school, she decided to move to the United States to live with her cousin, Jana Basutti. Her relative gladly took her in and helped her with the paperwork for a student visa. However, she was a very conservative woman, so Lorena, living in her house, had to abide by a strict set of rules, just like Jana's own children, and also take on some of the household duties. Despite everything, the young woman decided to stay in the U.S. as she realized that it offered her far more opportunities than Latin America. She had long been attracted to the beauty industry, so Gallo decided to train as a manicurist. Moreover, Basutti owned her own beauty salon, located in the city center, had extensive experience in the field, and was eager to help her niece learn the profession by allowing her to observe the work of the specialists and practice on her own. Later, her aunt arranged for her to work part-time in her salon. About 8 months after she moved to the new country, the young woman had settled in, enrolled in college, and was working as a manicurist in her relative's salon while gradually saving money. In September 1988, Lorena was preparing to go to a party with several of her friends. Her aunt gave her strict instructions on how to behave and what time she needed to be home, and she promised that everything would be fine. The modest young beauty was nervous, as it was her first time preparing to go to a nightlife establishment late at night. She chose a relatively modest outfit, unlike her friends, applied makeup, and styled her hair fashionably. Upon arriving at the nightclub, she was struck by the carefree and festive atmosphere. Inside, the venue was filled with young people dancing, having fun, and socializing, and Lorena couldn't help but think that such a place might be where she could meet the man of her dreams. This thought proved to be prophetic. A few minutes later, she noticed a very attractive young man intently looking at her and smiling. He waved at her, and she waved back. Then the young man approached her and introduced himself. He was John Bobbitt, and he could not take his eyes off the young beauty with the quite exotic appearance. The guy was handsome, tall, and charismatic. He cracked jokes and skillfully paid compliments, so she couldn't resist his charm. They spent the evening dancing and chatting, and afterwards the new acquaintance walked Lorena to her aunt's home. As they said goodbye, he asked for her home phone number and promised to call soon. John Wayne Bobbitt was born on March 24, 1967, in Buffalo in the northwestern part of New York State. He was the youngest of 3 children in his family. At the age of 3, the boy lost his father, who tragically died, and his mother, unable to cope with the shock, ended up in a psychiatric clinic after a serious nervous breakdown. All 3 children were taken into the care of their religious aunt and uncle, who wanted to help their relatives in this difficult situation. The boy was still very young at the time, but the events that occurred undoubtedly left a mark on his life. The aunt and uncle raised the children with strictness in accordance with religious canons. They all attended church every Sunday and engaged in charity work, trying to help those around them. John was not an outstanding student, but overall he did fairly well in school. As a teenager, he decided to pursue a future in military service. After undergoing the necessary training and special preparation at a military academy, the young man joined the ranks of the Marines, where he proved himself as a brave, disciplined, and determined young man. However, after a few years, the strict regime and the need to obey in the army began to weigh on him. After leaving the service with some military experience and skills, he was hired as a security guard at one of the city's popular establishments, but he later changed jobs frequently, not staying long at any. The day after they met, John, as promised, called Lorena to ask her out on a date. The young couple simply walked through the park, engaging in easy conversation about various topics, and John made it clear that he wanted to continue their relationship. Lorena was not opposed to this, but according to the rules set by her aunt, she had to introduce her boyfriend to her before they could start a serious relationship. John accepted all the conditions, and on the appointed day, he came to dinner at the home of his beloved's relative. Bobbitt was very sweet, courteous, and considerate, yet he made an effort to appear serious. He managed to make a good impression on the strict janitor, and after a serious one-on-one conversation with the young man, the woman allowed her niece to continue seeing John. 6 months after the start of their romantic relationship, the suitor proposed to Lorena, and she accepted. She was overjoyed, having always dreamed of a family, children, and a home of her own. The couple began preparing for the most important event of their lives, and in June 1989, shortly after Gallo turned 19, they made their union official. The wedding celebration was quite modest, as the young couple did not have the money for a lavish ceremony, and they chose to spend their savings on a honeymoon by the warm ocean coast. They were happy, but the only shadow over the celebration was the absence of the bride and groom's parents. Instead, their aunts and uncles came to share the joyous moment with them. After the wedding and a delightful honeymoon, the couple moved to Virginia and settled in a quiet and cozy area of the city called Manassas. The first few months of their life together were like a real fairy tale. They enjoyed each other's company, showing mutual tenderness, care, and love. But as the new year of 1990 approached, the situation began to change for the worse. At first, Lorena tried not to pay much attention to some of her young husband's remarks and rudeness, thinking it was just a so-called adjustment period. But one day, when she served cooled soup for dinner, her husband simply threw the plate on the floor and then started yelling at his wife, insulting her and calling her a terrible homemaker. She tried to argue, pointing out that John Wong, he closely monitored where she went and who she spoke to. At home, she had to follow the rules he set, and intimacy between them occurred only when John wanted it, regardless of Lena's wishes. The poor girl couldn't share her problems with anyone, as she found the situation shameful and humiliating. On June 22, 1993, John, along with his longtime military buddy, decided to go out to an entertainment venue. The men partied and drank until late at night, while Lorena was at home alone. She did not wait up for her husband, and went to the bedroom around midnight, soon falling asleep. Around 3 in the morning, a drunk and aroused John returned home. He didn't waste any time, and ripped the shirt off his sleeping wife. Lorena hardly understood what was happening when her husband forcefully took advantage of her. She begged him to stop and not to do this, crying, but he was completely indifferent to her pleas and tears. After it was over, John simply collapsed next to her and fell asleep. Lorena, trembling and sobbing, made her way to the kitchen. She poured herself some water and took a few sips to calm down. But then her gaze fell on a stand with large, sharp kitchen knives. Her hand reached out on its own and pulled out a carving knife. Out of her mind, she went back to the bedroom where her husband lay on his back, snoring drunkenly. She grabbed his genitalia with her left hand, squeezed hard and sharply cut through with the knife, severing a large part of it. John jumped up, screaming in agony, while Lorena simply walked out of the room, went to the garage and got into her car, speeding away through the deserted nighttime streets of the city. She only came to her senses at an intersection when she saw a red light at the traffic signal. At that moment, she looked at her blood-stained hands and realized that she was still holding the severed part of John's body in her left hand. She rolled down the window and threw the detested piece of flesh out, then continued driving. Lorena headed to the home of a close friend who was stunned by her nighttime visit and the state she was in. After Lorena told her what had happened, her friend, realizing the gravity of the situation, called the police herself and summoned a medical team to the house where the injured Bobbitt was. Precision surgery was required. Throughout this ordeal, John was desperately trying to stop the bleeding by pressing a sheet against his wound. Notably, the groin vein is a major vessel, and its injury nearly always results in death from blood loss. However, John was somewhat fortunate, if one could say that, because a clot had formed, significantly slowing the blood loss. The responding medics arrived in time to transport him to the nearest hospital, where he received immediate medical attention. The question then arose about the whereabouts of the severed part of his genitalia, as it was still possible to reattach it to its original place with restoration of its initial physiological functions. Lorena indicated the approximate area of the road where she had discarded her husband's anatomical fragment, and after an extensive search, the police were able to find it. The amputated organ was cleansed with antiseptic, then placed in a special container with medical ice and urgently transported to the hospital where the injured party was already being treated. The surgeon who arrived from the state capital was astounded by the complexity of the situation, as he had never encountered such a case before, but he proceeded with the operation anyway. He performed a unique surgery for that time which lasted more than 9 hours and was more than successful. Despite the traumatic amputation of the organ and the fact that it had lain on the road for over an hour, all tissues and vessels were successfully reattached, and the patient quickly began to recover. Public outcry ensued. That same night, Lorena was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning, as well as to clarify all the circumstances and motives of her actions. She immediately confessed to everything and shared her harrowing story that had driven her to such a desperate act. She recounted how 4 years of marriage had turned into a real nightmare for her, with her husband regularly abusing her, both emotionally and physically, and forcing intimacy only when he desired. Mrs. Bobbitt also mentioned how, about a year ago, her husband had forced her to terminate a pregnancy, despite her deep desire to have a child, and that abortion had been a traumatizing event for her. Regarding the incident itself, she said she remembered very little of that night and had acted as if she were in a fog. Lorena recounted how her husband had come home drunk and simply taken advantage of her, and although she tried to resist, he ignored her. After the incident, she went to the kitchen for water, and the next thing she remembered was her husband's scream, the roar of the car engine, and the part of his genitalia that she was clutching in her hand as she sat behind the wheel. The case caused a significant stir in the press and was actively covered by the media. Many women like Lorena, who had suffered from domestic violence, as well as feminist organizations, which were gaining strength and popularity at the time, rallied to her side. In the early 90s, wives who were subjected to emotional and physical abuse by their husbands typically remained silent about their plight. Society was still inclined to blame the victims themselves, suggesting that they provoked conflicts or behaved improperly. It was assumed that a wife should be submissive and obey her husband in everything, and if the husband was dissatisfied and resorted to violence, it was considered the wife's fault. It was her fault. Intimacy in marriage was considered a duty of the wife, not open to discussion. On the other hand, almost all men sided with John. Many feared that Lorena's act might prove contagious, prompting other women suffering from physical and intimate violence in marriage to also take up knives. According to official statistics, there were several million such women in the country at that time. Trials and sentences of the spouses, 2 parallel court cases, began almost simultaneously. Lorena officially charged her husband only with taking advantage of her on that fateful night, although in court she detailed the years of regular abuse and beatings, emotional violence and humiliation she endured, as well as the abortion she was forced to undergo against her will under her husband's coercion. John's testimony was confused. He denied all allegations against him, but much of what Lorena said was corroborated by facts. For instance, it was confirmed that he did not have steady employment or a stable source of income, yet he loved spending time in entertainment venues, often forcibly or deceitfully taking money from his wife to do so. Additionally, Lorena's friends confirmed that they had repeatedly seen bruises and scrapes on her body, and she had been in a depressed state for a long time, though she tried not to complain. The court concluded that the husband had indeed abused his wife both emotionally and physically throughout their marriage, driving her to desperation. However, regarding the charge of intimate violence that occurred on the night of June 23, 1993, there was not enough evidence, and thus John was acquitted. He presented several versions of what happened that evening, and the jury, composed of 9 women and 3 men, found him not guilty. In the fall of that year, Lorena's trial began in September 1993. She was charged with inflicting severe bodily harm on her spouse. Her lawyers argued that she acted while suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, caused by the ongoing emotional and physical abuse from her husband. A psychiatric evaluation was ordered, which confirmed that she acted in a state of distress, unaware of her actions, and therefore could not be held responsible for what she had done. In early January of the following year, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Lorena could not be held criminally responsible for her actions, as she was in a state of insanity at the time of the offense. However, she was required to undergo a 6-week treatment program at a specialized clinic, after which she was able to return to her previous life. The spouses officially divorced only in 1995, after which Lorena reverted to her maiden name. What became of John later? John remained indignant for a long time that his wife faced no punishment for her actions. He decided to fully capitalize on his sudden notoriety, aiming to extract as much money as possible from such scandalous fame. John founded his own music band called Severed Parts, but the group was short-lived as it failed to garner any public interest. When offered a substantial fee to star in adult films in the late 90s, he did not hesitate to accept. Thus, he appeared in explicit films titled Frankenpenis, a play on Frankenstein, and John Wayne Bobbitt Uncut. John acted in several more films of a similar genre, but interest in him and his reattached organ quickly waned. For a long time, John was eager to appear on various talk shows and gave interviews extensively, but over the years, such offers became less frequent, and the story gradually faded from memory. John then found work as a bartender in an entertainment venue in Las Vegas, and by his 50s, he was struggling to make ends meet by taking jobs as a mover, driver, and pizza delivery man. In 1999, he received a suspended sentence for theft. Regarding his personal life during the high-profile court case that the entire country followed, journalists discovered that Bobbitt had an illegitimate son named Andrew, born in 1992 to one of his lovers, Beatrice Williams. In 1994, John was brought to trial for assaulting his new girlfriend, Christina Elliott, who worked as a dancer in a nightclub. He spent 15 days in jail for this and received probation. In the early 2000s, John was arrested 3 times for assaulting his then-wife, Joanna Farrell. This time, he was imprisoned for a year for violating his probation. They officially divorced in 2004. What happened to Lorena? Unlike her former husband, Lorena did not take pride in her scandalous notoriety and tried to stay out of the limelight. In 1996, she decided to return to her native Ecuador, where her mother, Elia, was living at the time. However, just 6 months later, Lorena made the news again when her mother accused her of assault. The conflict was resolved without going to court, and the women continued to live together. A year later, Lorena returned to the USA, where she opened her own small beauty salon in Washington. In 2007, she founded a foundation called Lena's Red Wagon, which focused on helping women who had suffered from domestic violence. Soon after, Lorena agreed to give an interview for the first time in a long time and appeared on CBS News Morning Show, where she discussed her life post-incident. She also appeared on the popular Oprah Winfrey talk show in the mid-2000s. Lorena remarried, and her new husband was a man named Dave Bellinger, with whom she had a daughter in 2006. She preferred not to recall her marriage to Bob at all, and claimed she did not follow his life after their divorce. In 2009, nearly 15 years after their sensational legal battles had ended, the former spouses met face to face for the first time on the show Insider. John apologized to Lorena for the way he had treated her during their marriage and declared that he still loved her despite everything. Lorena was visibly moved by his words and confirmed that every year on Valentine's Day, her ex-husband still sends her flowers and cards. On the morning of May 25, 2013, Marshall University was celebrating the graduation of a new cadre of professionals. Mark and Joanna McDermott were supposed to be among the parents witnessing their children receive their diplomas. However, their day took an unexpected turn. This is the of Mark McDermott, a model family man who faced betrayal by someone he considered and raised as his own son for nearly 20 years. Mark McDermott was born in the early 1960s in Australia. Little is known about his upbringing and personal life. What is known is that Mark was the eldest of 5 siblings. His father, Bruce McDermott, as well as 2 younger sisters, Tracy and Nicole, with Nicole being the youngest, are his only known relatives. Close acquaintances have described Mark as not only a successful businessman, but also a kind and responsive individual. Nicole portrayed her older brother as a wonderful person who could never deliberately cause harm to anyone. Very little information is available about Mark's life, including his adult years. At some point, Mark traveled to the southern United States. The circumstances and reasons for this journey remain unknown. It was during this time in the U.S. that he met Joanna Dunn, a single mother with a 4-year-old child. Even less information exists about Joanna's life. Most accounts come from her own narratives. However, the words she shared publicly were almost entirely dedicated to her son, who is also central to this story, Donald Wayne Dunn. Donald Wayne Dunn was born in the early 1990s in West Virginia, where he lived his entire life with his mother's family. His grandparents played a significant role in his upbringing, since they cared for him most of the time. The reason Joanna, a working single mother, entrusted much of Donald's upbringing to her parents was that she found it challenging to raise a child alone. Even when they managed to spend time together, Joanna often turned to video games and television to entertain Donald. On the rare days they were home together, it was challenging for her to give him all her attention. However, everything changed with Mark's entry into their lives. The couple quickly started a relationship and soon got married. Joanna adopted her husband's last name, and all 3 moved to West Virginia, becoming a very close-knit family from the beginning. Mark and Donald developed a close relationship as if they were truly related by blood. Some who knew them, including Mark's sisters and father, confidently stated that Mark treated the boy as his own son, and Donald regarded him as his only father. Their strong bond was evident. When Donald was still a minor, Mark and Joanna's relationship went through a difficult period that ended in a temporary separation. Despite Mark living alone for some time, Donald insisted on residing with him rather than his mother. During those months, the family faced another challenging period when Joanna was diagnosed with cancer. However, by supporting each other, they managed to get through these tough times. Mark always ensured that his stepson had a comfortable life without any deprivation. He made sure Donald never lacked anything he needed. Although Donald was a simple person who never asked for much, he seemed grateful for the peaceful and luxurious life his stepfather provided. In 2008, when Donald graduated from high school, Mark took on the financial responsibility for his higher education at Rio Enoe Community College, where he studied for 2 years. Mark continued to pay for his education, even when, in 2010, Donald transferred to Marshall University. Despite living with his girlfriend, with whom he had been in a relationship since he was 15, and her family, he always enjoyed unconditional support from Mark and Joanna. It's noteworthy that their financial assistance wasn't limited to just tuition fees. They also covered expenses for clothing, car insurance, and paid for his living and food expenses. Donald only had to focus on his studies. A responsible and dedicated young man who strictly followed his daily routine and often canceled or declined plans with loved ones due to study commitments or practical work requirements for upcoming exams. During his 5 years of university education, he maintained this lifestyle, aiming to graduate on time without falling behind in any semester. Saturday, May 25, 2013, was to be a significant day for him as he was scheduled to receive his diploma. However, what was meant to be a special for celebration turned into a deeply distressing moment that would forever alter his life. As the Meckett family prepared for Donald's graduation ceremony, an emergency call was made to 911 from their home. What is your name? Joanna McDermott. I shot my husband. Okay, is he breathing? No. Was it an accident? No, we were fighting. You were fighting? Yes, it was supposed to be a happy day. It's his graduation. Your child's graduation? Yes. Is your child okay? Will the police be coming too? Yes. Authorities promptly headed to the McDermott residence. Sergeant Greg Kean of the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office was one of the first law enforcement officers to arrive at the scene. Upon arrival, he found Joanna in a state of severe shock. Moving further into the house, he saw Mark lying lifelessly on the couch in the living room. It appeared he had been reading a book at the time of his death. At first glance, Mark had 2 gunshot wounds to the head. When investigators moved the body, they discovered a 3rd wound in the back of his shoulder. The medical examiner at the scene confirmed that although the cause of death was indeed due to head wounds, death was likely not instantaneous. The amount of blood at the scene indicated that Mark's prolonged survival led to significant blood loss. According to initial reports on the incident, Donald had been preparing for his significant day, and noise from the shower drowned out the sound of gunshots. Consequently, he did not realize Joanna had shot his stepfather until he exited the bathroom and found Mark's body in the living room. All right, how old is your husband? My husband is 54. And you were just fighting? Yes. All right, did you shoot him in the side? No, in the head. In the head? Yes. Okay, try not to touch anything. My son is in the bathroom. I need to attempt to go downstairs so he can assist me. How old is your son? He is 23. Does he know what has happened? He doesn't know. He's downstairs for his graduation. The pistol was lying on the dining table next to a letter, presumably written by Joanna and addressed to Donald. In it, the distressed woman explained to her son that her marriage had become intolerable and that she could not stay in a relationship with someone she no longer loved. She also apologized for leaving his life without seeing him grow into a man. At that moment, Joanna and Donald were taken in separate cars to the Raleigh County Sheriff's Office, where an officer was to take their statements. Since Joanna called emergency services, the case appeared to be another instance of domestic violence with a tragic conclusion. In her conversation with the operator, Joanna claimed that she and Mark had argued, and in a fit of rage without realizing her actions, she shot him in the head with her pistol. This narrative surprised the officers who took her for questioning, because she then made a confession that completely overturned her initial story and thus changed the entire course of the investigation. When the doors of the police car closed, Joanna revealed that it was not she who ended Mark's life, but her son Donald. However, this revelation was not all. The story turned out to be far more intricate than what investigators had assumed. Once in the interrogation room, Joanna recounted to Captain James Barr of Raleigh County Sheriff's Office the sequence of events that took place on May 25, 2013. She mentioned that her son's graduation was scheduled for earlier in the day. In the morning, she left home to run some errands and buy groceries. Upon returning home, and as she was about to get out of her car, Donald approached her and asked her to close her eyes, follow him into the house. He had a surprise for her. Trusting her son had prepared something special, she blindly followed him into the dining room where he suggested she sit down. At that moment, Joanna heard a distinctive click. When she finally turned to look at Donald, she found herself face to face with the barrel her own pistol in his hands. The gun did not fire. Joanna, completely frightened, managed to grab it and wrest it from her son's hands. She overcame her panic, which allowed her to think clearly and devise a plan of action to save herself from becoming Donald's second victim. Seeing Mark's lifeless body, she quickly told Donald that she was going to call emergency services and take the blame for the crime. Although the young man initially seemed to doubt her plan, he eventually agreed. During the interrogation, Joanna explained that she decided to call emergency services to protect herself from her own son. She understood that by confessing to a crime she did not commit, she would end up behind bars. Joanna added that she was sure that if she didn't do this, Donald would try to end her life. She also confessed that in the 23 years she had been his mother, she never thought he would point a gun at her head and pull the trigger. The gun used by Donald belonged to Joanna. She explained that it did not fire, probably because she had pulled the slide back far enough on the semi-automatic weapon, which prevents a normal shot. Captain Barr explained that Joanna's story seemed entirely logical to him, because from the first moment he saw Donald, he had a feeling something was off. He noted that considering the severity of the situation, the 23-year-old young man appeared unusually calm and always maintained a neutral facial expression. For this reason, he ordered Donald be placed in a separate interrogation room away from his mother from the beginning of the interrogation. Donald denied any involvement in his stepfather's death. His facade, however, quickly crumbled when he was told of Joanna's statements. James Barr did not need to use any intimidation tactics to get the young man to confess. He didn't pressure him or demand detailed information to piece together the case. Donald voluntarily provided everything. The story that unfolded was almost unbelievable. It all began after Donald's first year of college. He wasn't doing well in his studies and decided to drop out due to poor grades. Initially, his classes were simple. Just showing up at the right room, and time was enough for good grades. But as the semester progressed, it required more effort. According to Donald, he felt he didn't have the strength to continue his studies. Instead of telling the truth, he chose to lie to Mark and Joanna. His close relatives were not the only ones deceived. Even his girlfriend and her family were unaware of what was happening. Rachel Rush, his girlfriend's sister, said Donald maintained a routine that made it seem like he was attending classes. He left and returned home at regular times, spending most of his day in his room under the pretense of needing focus for assignments or tests. Donald even went as far as falsifying grade reports. This deception lasted for 4.5 years without anyone suspecting a thing. His family's faith in him remained unwavering as he pretended to be a student. Joanna and Mark had no idea that their son was misusing the money they provided to support him. Donald claimed he never meant to deceive his family for so long. But as days went by, speaking the truth just got harder and harder. The one thing that stopped him from being honest? The fear that Mark and Joanna would stop covering his expenses. Even though he acted like material things, a car and fancy clothes didn't matter much, the reality different. Losing his lifestyle was a big deal for him. Over several months, Donald thought he had the perfect plan to get away everything. From the start, he planned something drastic to take his parents' lives. He wanted to avoid suspicion by leaving a note, something similar to what was found on the dining table with the pistol. Donald believed that when authorities read it, they'd think it was written by a distressed woman stuck in an unhappy marriage who saw no other way but to take her husband's life and then her own. On May 25th, Donald told Captain Barr that he secretly took Joanna's pistol and kept it all day while pretending to prepare for his graduation. Part of his plan included creating an alibi by going to the supermarket so surveillance cameras would record him there. However, things didn't go as planned. He didn't expect his mother's gun to jam, just as he tried to pull the trigger aimed at her head. The conclusions and plans Donald revealed later baffled everyone who heard them. James Barr shared that Donald even confessed he had practiced the emotions he'd display on his face when authorities arrived at the scene. He also considered how he would finance his life after losing the stable income provided by Mark and decided to rely on the sympathy of his relatives for as long as. While they supported him, he planned to engage in sports to improve his physical condition. Ultimately, when left with no other options, he intended to enlist in the police or the army. Reflecting on the feasibility of his plan, Donald concluded it would be easier to kill his mother and stepfather than to confess that he had been deceiving them for almost 5 years. According to a legal document from the Supreme Court of West Virginia, published in April 2016, a month after his arrest in June 2013, Donald was charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. Even before the trial commenced, Donald and his legal team sought ways to delay proceedings. A few weeks before the scheduled start of hearings, while already in solitary confinement, Donald underwent surgery on his right hand. His lawyers used this surgery as a pretext to request a delay in starting the process and arguing that during initial sessions, Donald would be under strong painkillers' influence. To decide on this matter, the court first required medical documents of the defendant. Eventually, the request was denied. The court observed that during preliminary hearings, Donald showed no signs of being significantly impaired by painkillers and thus deemed him competent to participate in the trial, approving its continuation. The trial took place in August 2014, more than a year following Mark's tragic death. The jury trial was presided over by Judge John A. Hutchinson, with David White serving as Donald's attorney and Christine Keller representing Raleigh County Prosecutor's Office. Mark's 2 sisters, accompanied by 1 niece, traveled over 15,000 kilometers from Australia to witness the trial of someone they had considered family for nearly 20 years. Although detailed information from witness testimonies or evidence presented is not available, and there is a lack of photos and videos, It is known that the defense intended to state in their opening arguments that Donald was under illegal drugs influence at the time of the crime. There is no evidence that this was ever referenced before or confirmed through any toxicological tests. Just a few days after the initial, specifically on August 14, 2014, Donald Dunn was found guilty of the first degree of his stepfather, Mark McDermot. He was also convicted of attempting to murder his mother, Joanna McDermott, and using a firearm in the commission of these crimes. On September 5th of the same year, Judge John Hutchinson sentenced Donald to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for his stepfather's murder, and an additional 15 years for attempting to murder his mother. After the sentence was announced, Joanna read an emotional letter she had prepared for the court. In her statement, Donald's mother mentioned that something bad had happened at some point in her son's life, possibly after his grandparents' illness, or due to the pressure she applied for him to study at the university. She also suggested that frequent play of violent video games from a young age might have had an impact. Joanna expressed her disapproval of the public image created of her son, and made clear her disagreement with the harsh sentence handed down. Judge Hutchinson responded that Joanna's disapproval did not influence his decision. He stated that he believed the sentence imposed was necessary to restore justice in this unjust situation. The judge sympathized with Donald's mother, but maintained that shielding her son from the consequences of his actions could not be justified under these serious circumstances. After the verdict, Mark's sister and father expressed their continuing disbelief at how Donald could take the life of a man who had raised him as his own son for 19 years. Though they acknowledged that Mark would never be brought back by this verdict, they were grateful for the judgment rendered by Judge Hutchinson. In the early hours of July 7, 1985, 54-year-old Jane Anchor Hilton was found beaten and stabbed to death. She was discovered in a bedroom at her employer's house, a house she moved into only the previous day seeking refuge from a troubled marriage. Jane was discovered by two fellow housemates and her own daughter, Autumn. The murder made no sense, and the case dragged for 14 years, until two new detectives reopened the cold case in 1999. A misquote in an article led investigators to point the finger at Ricky Davis. Davis was eventually tried for the crime and convicted, all the while proclaiming his innocence. Determined not to give up, he sought help from the same justice system that put him behind bars. 15 years later, Davis was exonerated and the real killer found thanks to genetic genealogy testing and the determination of a group called the Innocence Project, who were determined to find the truth. Jane was a familiar face around El Dorado Hills, California. She was a columnist for Foothill Times. She often covered social events in and around town for the paper. Jane had 6 children whom she loved, and often wrote poetry to help inspire them daily. She'd been working toward getting her real estate license, and was married to Archie Hilton in 1984. However, by July 1985, their marriage started to fall apart. It was then she asked her employer, Wilma Klein, for assistance. Klein owned a fairly large home in El Dorado Hills. With her lived her daughter, Maureen Klein, and her boyfriend. Wilma's grandson, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, also occupied a room at the house. On July 6, 1985, Wilma welcomed Jane and her youngest daughter, 13-year-old Autumn Anchor, into her home. By all accounts, it was a full house. The first night of her new life would prove to be the night her life ended. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, then 20, and his girlfriend, 19-year-old Connie Dahl, returned from a party to find Autumn lingering about outside. She told them she was out late and afraid her mother was going to be angry. All three made their way into the house. There was blood in the hallway. It was silent as they reached the first room, belonging to Maureen, Ricky's mother. On the bed was the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She was not breathing. Maureen and her boyfriend had gone on a camping trip and were not home at the time. Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had suffered 29 stab wounds, was beaten and bitten on her shoulder. It was a senseless murder, and investigators began to interview those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was interviewed and provided detectives with a solid alibi and DNA. Archie had been the logical choice, as he and Jane had been going through a rough patch. He, however, said that the marriage was not over and that there was no trouble between them. He was cleared and all leaves went cold. Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl both told investigators they arrived home in the early morning hours and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet bloody. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloodied mattress. They speculated that an intruder may have been responsible for the murder. For 14 years, the case remained unsolved. The cold case reopened in 1999. El Dorado County Sheriff's detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald retest with the investigation. After poring over paperwork, they zoomed in on a news article. Connie Dahl, former girlfriend of Ricky Davis and housemate of Jane Hilton, had given an interview to a reporter. She was quoted saying Hilton's body was lying in bed like someone placed her there in the position she would normally sleep in. This statement seemed to contradict a muffled audio recording of a statement that Davis had previously made. Detective Fitzgerald falsely thought he heard him say the body was found on the floor. Dahl was, at the time, serving the jail sentence in Oregon on unrelated charges. Detectives brought her in for an interview and began a 3-hour-long interrogation. Initially, Dahl stuck to her original story. Over the next 18 months, though, she would be interrogated 4 times. Detectives were found to have used techniques known to increase the chances of a false confession. Dahl was systematically forced into incriminating Davis and Jane's daughter Autumn in the murder. Dahl was threatened with the charge of murder. If she cooperated, though, she would be given a lenient sentence of manslaughter and serve only a year. Detectives Strasser and Fitzgerald told Dahl that DNA evidence was going to be used to trace the suspect. In truth, no DNA evidence was brought into the case during that period. In truth, testing had not been done on the DNA recovered from the scene. By showing a crime scene photos and using facts from the crime, such as the bike mark on Jane's shoulder, investigators fed Dahl the information they wanted to hear. Over the course of the 4 interviews, Dahl was starting to break. She began remembering facts from the crime. This, in turn, allowed her to fabricate and create an entirely different account of events from the night of the murder. In one interview, Dahl said that Autumn was present during the murder of Jane and was sprayed with blood. In another, she confessed that she was probably the person that bit Jane on the shoulder. Dahl would say that the murder began with an argument between Davis and Jane. She alleged that Davis wanted Autumn to join them in a party. When Jane refused, Davis erupted in a fit of anger, leading to the death of Jane. Her story kept changing to fit the facts being fed. However, she couldn't remember the weapon used for the murder or where it was eventually hidden. Dahl had implicated her ex-boyfriend Davis in the murder of Jane Hilton. He was now the prime suspect. Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker were also interviewed following the confession of Connie Dahl. Both Davis and Anker stuck to their original accounts of the crime. Detectives again lied to Davis, telling him that Anker had also implicated him in the murder. Anker told detectives she had no reason to protect Davis when they threatened her with culpability regarding the murder. Despite their interrogation techniques, detectives could not sway Davis or Anker to change their stories. They therefore used the confession of Dahl to arrest Davis. Dahl was offered a plea bargain to testify against Davis at his trial. Davis's first trial was declared a mistrial by jurors. His second in 2005 would eventually convict him. Dahl took the stand and testified against Davis. She told the court of how she struggled with Jane, and she herself accidentally bit the victim on the shoulder. She went on to say that she went outside as Davis continued the bloody assault on Hilton. Dahl said she could hear screaming, pleading and gurgling as Davis continued the brutal attack. Based entirely on the testimony of Dahl's account of events, Davis was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the second-degree murder of Jane Hilton. Dahl received a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a year-long sentence at the county jail. Dahl, though, would eventually die from a drug overdose in 2014. Meanwhile, Davis was not going down without a fight. He maintained his innocence and in 2006 made contact with the Northern California Innocence Project. He asked if they could help him prove that he was wrongly convicted. The NCP was founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolph and Linda Starr. The project began after legislation offered convicted inmates to seek DNA testing to prove their innocence. It's a non-profit clinical program of Sagittaria University's School of Law. After Davis made contact with the NCP in 2006, his case was put through a thorough re-examination. Cooperation between the NCP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office allowed for the DNA recovered from the crime scene to be retested post-conviction. Evidence from the crime scene included Hilton's neck gown and biological material found under her fingernails. The results revealed an unknown male DNA profile. DNA from Hilton's fingernails and neck gown were both found to be from the same source. Test results eliminated Davis, Dahl, and Anker. This proved Dahl's testimony was contradictory to the physical evidence and therefore had to have been fabricated. The DNA also proved Archie Hilton innocent. Unfortunately, he had passed away by the time results were released. The DNA profile file was entered into the FBI Combined Index DNA System, CODIS, but no matches were found. Although the evidence seemed to prove Davis's consistent claim of innocence correct, there were some hurdles that still needed to be jumped. The NCP successfully argued that had the DNA results been presented to the jury during Davis's trial, the outcome would be different. However, until January 2017, the California standard required that new evidence point unerringly to innocence. It was considered an almost unattainable standard. In 2015, a false confession expert, Richard Leo, reviewed transcripts of Dahl's interrogations. Leo concluded that the methods used by detectives during the interrogation of Dahl were designed to pressure and persuade Dahl to adopt an account that matched the detectives' pre-existing beliefs about how and why the murder of Jane Hilton occurred. In 2016, though, the NCIP co-sponsored Senate Bill 1134. This bill allowed wrongfully convicted inmates, like Davis, to prove that new evidence would likely have been compelling to a jury. NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a petition for a new trial based on the new DNA evidence testing. Championed by former California State Senator Marthelino, the bill was passed in January 2017, putting California's standard in line with that of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian vacated Davis's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. Initially set to start in fall of 2019, however, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020, citing the defense attorney's health as the catalyst for change in date. However, the fate of the trial was about to change once again. Advancements in DNA testing led to Davis becoming the first convicted person in California and the second in the United States to be exonerated for a crime. Genetic genealogy is a fairly new DNA testing concept. It involves taking DNA evidence from a crime scene and sending them to genetic companies. These companies then search family tree databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, DNA evidence matched to a man considered an unlikely suspect. El Dorado County Attorney Vern Pearson announced in February 2020 that a new suspect had been identified as the man linked to the DNA evidence found on Jane Hilton's body. Following the arrest, many people spoke to the media about the man they knew as Michael Green. Green was a longtime resident of Roseville, California. He graduated from Oakmount High School in 1986. He was described as an easygoing, kind person, even-tempered, and even super chill. One classmate who wanted to remain anonymous could not understand why Green would go to El Dorado Hills and brutally murder a woman. According to reports, Green was 17 years old at the time of Hilton's murder. On the night of July 6, 1985, the victim's daughter Autumn met Green and two of his friends, Calvin and Stephen. They hung out together at the park when Autumn decided to go home and have a shower before returning. Allegedly, Autumn told her mother she was going to another friend's house for the evening. Instead, she returned to the park to join the boys. What happened next is pure speculation. Investigators believe that during this time, Green broke into the house and was confronted by Jane. In a struggle to get away, Green may have attacked her in a frenzy. Following the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Davis, Dahl, and Autumn when they returned home. Green had no criminal convictions either before or after the murder. It seems he'd led a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. The other two boys who were with Green were tracked down shortly after his arrest. Calvin, unfortunately, had died some time ago. Stephen, however, was found and interviewed the day after the arrest. He was being treated as a witness and not a participant. Green was arrested on February 11, 2020. Since Green was a teenager at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance at the juvenile court on February 19, 2020. District Attorney Vern Pearson said that, procedurally, the court has to go through some steps on the juvenile side of it. Following this, Green was granted the transfer so that he could be tried as an adult. He waited 2.5 years before he would be tried in court. Green pleaded no contest on July 29, 2022. This plea means Green gave up his right to a jury trial. A jury trial meant he was to face a charge of first-degree murder. He also gave up his chance to challenge the plea or the consequences of his decision. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, to be presided over by Judge Suzanne Kingsbury. At sentencing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor in psychological science education, was called in on educational capacity to explain to the court the development of an adolescent. Kaufman's research explained the varying development needs of adolescents with regard to emotional and cognitive development. The late adolescent stage allowed an individual to understand right from wrong. Yet, at the same time, they're also functioning under diminished capacity for impulse control. The defense called several witnesses from Green's childhood, some who even maintained relationships with him into adulthood. Each witness was asked if their opinion had changed of him since the knowledge of his confession. All witnesses agreed they'd been shocked to discover that he was responsible for the murder of Hilton. Individuals who knew him in varying capacities described him as jovial, popular, funny, and loving. These words were used to describe him before and after the murder. Green's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, after witness statements were given, each of Jane Hilton's children presented their victim impact statements. They all described the unforgivable loss that Green inflicted upon their family. The why it happened and how different my life could have been will haunt me forever, said Heather Purvis McConnell, one of Jane's daughters. Argith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, I loved my mother, and I assume Lico loves his mother too. I want to know what he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you received an early morning call to tell you your mother is dead? The court listened to her description of the feeling of gathering her mother's belongings from the house in which she was killed. Argith finished with a powerful declaration. We will always have something in common, regretting the stupid decision you made 37 years ago. Hilton's son Ian echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the uncertainty the family faced and the recurring nightmares they suffered, especially after the crooked finger of blame was pointed at his own sister, Autumn. He broke down in tears as he ended with an almost inaudible remark. All the words we say will never bring my mother back. Autumn was the last to speak. Her statement showed true agony as she recounted the cloud of suspicions she'd lived under for the last 2 decades. Recounting the day 2 crew-cup-thick mustache detectives came into her house, telling her they found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was then repeatedly accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn went on to say that if she hadn't said the word lawyer at that point, she did not know how much further the intimidation tactics of the investigators could have gone. Afterwards, Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he asked Green what made him end Jane's life in such a brutal manner. You beat her. She had numerous wounds around her head and face. By your own words, you kicked her jaw. You bit her on the shoulder. Why was that? Linden continued to read the statement that expressed how Green didn't just murder Jane, he destroyed numerous lives in the process. Linden then asked Green if he'd given any thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her achievements and the love she had for each of her children. In closing arguments, Margaret Husher, Green's defense attorney, stressed the idea that he was unable to stop himself. She emphasized that he did not know what he was doing was wrong, as he was an adolescent at the time. This argument was based on the testimony of expert witness Dr. Kaufman. She asked that the court show mercy as she read off the multiple penal codes and rules of the court. Judge Kingsbury interjected by saying, the court is not going to put him on probation, effectively ending any further comment from the defense. In response, Linden thanked the court and said the application for probation was offensive. He said, Linden stated that he already got away with murder for 37 years. Placing him on probation allowed him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury said she had heard a multitude of arguments about murder cases surrounding adolescent development. She remarked that after her 26 years on the bench, Jane Hilton's murder was by far the most brutal. Before passing her sentence, Kingsbury asked the family for their forgiveness for the trauma they had suffered, although she was not originally assigned the case. She also hoped they would heal from the pain, as it would have been their mother's wish. Kingsbury then encouraged Green to use all resources at his disposal in the California Department of Rehabilitation. You're the key to the questions these people have. Doing that could ultimately help you with your outcome as it relates to parole, said Kingsbury. In closing, Kingsbury pointed out that she had heard from his friends that there's a great side to him and that he has much to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Green was sentenced to 15 years to life and remanded to the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be decided after further consideration by the court. Davis was released on February 13, 2020, and planned to celebrate over a pizza with his family. His lawyer, Melissa O'Connell, said he will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation for the wrongful conviction. Although the amount was high enough for him to re-enter society and start afresh, O'Connell said it could not make up for the years of freedom that he lost. Davis went on to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020 for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit News El Dorado County, as well as former detectives Richard Strasser, Rick Fitzgerald, Bill Wilson, who's deceased and been sued through his estate, and Larry Hennig. Sheriff's Office pathologist Dr. Robert Anthony has also been included in the complaint. The Village Life newspaper reported that Davis was homeless after being released. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644. This bill would, commencing January 1, 2024, prohibit law enforcement officers from employing threats, physical harm, deception, or psychological manipulative interrogation tactics as specified during a custodial interrogation of a person 17 years of age or younger. The bill faced opposition, but District Attorney Van Pearson is urging all law enforcement to stop using intimidation tactics. Pearson stated that 10 years ago, he would have viewed the methods used to get a confession differently. However, after seeing the true impact it can have, he believed there is room for change. This also comes after research points to deceptive tactics being used for years by law enforcement that will presume guilt and focus on getting a confession rather than getting the full story. The district attorney is implementing this new policy in his office and is urging other district attorneys to do the same. El Dorado County DA's office will now reject any case where the primary evidence is a confession obtained using threats, lies, or psychological manipulation interrogation tactics. These measures are to ensure that no one is ever again convicted based on a coerced false confession, like the case of Ricky Davis. Pearson personally apologized to all involved in the miscarriage of justice caused by the tactics used by then investigators into the brutal 1985 murder of Jane Hilton. After 37 years, the right man is finally facing justice. Yet the lives of so many were left broken by mistakes and false accusations. For Jane Hilton's family, hopefully they can now pick up the pieces after being divided over the innocence of their own sister, Autumn. Ricky Davis can never regain the liberty he lost. And Michael Green destroyed not only the lives of the victim's family and friends, but the lives that he touched in the years before and after the murder.